All right. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to the inaugural Energy Opportunity Forum, Catalyzing Energy for Development and Social Progress. Today's event is hosted by the Energy Opportunity Lab, an initiative of the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. My name is Dr. Vivek Shastri. I'm a senior research associate here at the center, and it is my honor to be your host for the day. And without further ado, let me invite Dr. Melissa Lott to provide the welcome remarks. Melissa is the Senior Director of Research and Senior Research Scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy. Melissa.
Thanks, Vivek, for welcoming me up here, and thanks to everyone for joining us today for what I hope will be really engaged discussions. I honestly say I hope, but I have no doubt they're going to be engaged discussions, in part because of the people in the room, the energy we have, no pun intended, for the work that we're talking about today, and the tremendous team that has put this all together. Before we start the day and get really into the topics and the discussion, I want to just give a big thanks to the Energy Opportunity Lab team. So I'm looking at Diana, I'm looking at Andrew, Vivek, where's Chandrasa? There you are. The entire events team that's put this on, thank you so much for everyone who's been involved in each step of putting together this discussion, which is the first of what will be many. We know the numbers about how much life opportunities, our health has improved over the last, let's say, 50 years at a global level. But when we start looking into the numbers and we start accepting the fact that while more people have access to electricity than they did before, in 2010, globally, it was 1.1 billion without access to any electricity. Now it's hundreds of millions. That is still a very big number, but that's an improvement. When we start diving in further, we realize that the gaps are actually still quite large. At a global level, we have hundreds of millions without access to electricity, but we have billions who are not able to access affordable and reliable electricity, things that are very critical to supporting life opportunities, the things that Diana and I discuss quite often, because this is her area of expertise, life chances. And these gaps are real, and we need to figure out ways to close them. What are the options that we have? This doesn't even start to begin the discussion of the billions of people without access to clean cooking fuels, the real and perceived challenges that lead to capital to put into infrastructure investment in different parts of the world, including in Africa, where it's 2 to 3 times more expensive to get money to pay for things that enable economic development and enable life chances and opportunities. But it's not just globally where we see these issues. We see these issues in the United States, in New York State, and in the city that we're sitting into today. So I will quote a number of numbers that were put out recently in a publication by the Center on Global Energy Policy with Diana and Chandrasa and Alexandra Peak, who used to be a research associate for us, put together, which shows that tens of millions of people in this country currently suffer from some form of energy insecurity, where they're forced to make terrible decisions between turning on an air conditioner when it's 90 plus degrees Fahrenheit in their homes, heating their home to a safe and comfortable temperature in the winter, or buying food, or getting medication, or doing all the other things that they want to do in their lives, things that keep them safe, keep them healthy, give them chances in life, chances for own development and their own realization of opportunities. And while the numbers are clear that income plays a factor in this, there's also a big gap that is shown in the numbers between different racial groups and different ethnic groups. If I am Black or brown in this country, I am more likely to suffer from energy insecurity across all the different pieces that when you go into that publication that we put out, they show you whether it's I can't afford to pay 6 to 10% of my income or more for my energy bills, or I live in low quality housing, and even if I turn on my heater or air conditioning, my home is never going to be safe. It's never going to get to that temperature I need it to be. And if I do that, I run the risk of being evicted because I can't pay my bills. I run the risk of actually just never being able to get my home to the place I need it to be to keep my family safe. These are terrible choices. So we know what the numbers tell us. We know that they are not what we want them to be. So what do we do about it? Where do we go from here? And this is where we spend our time at the Center on Global Energy Policy. We say, what does the evidence tell us? I'm looking at Jason Bordoff, our director over here. What does the evidence tell us? Now, what do we do about it? How do we translate evidence and research into actionable recommendations that decision makers can pick up and say, I know there's a problem. Hundreds of millions of people without access to electricity, billions without access to affordable, reliable electricity. That's not okay. But then in my own backyard, to think that 1 in 3 maybe more Americans are without access to something that we all think we should be able to take for granted. I know it's a problem now. What do I do about it? What does the evidence say that I can do about it? And how do I put that into action? So when it comes to the Energy Opportunity Lab, these questions, these statistics were the foundation for setting up this program that we're going to be kicking off today with this forum, the first forum here on campus, to talk about energy opportunity. What does it mean? And what can we do to make sure that everyone has access to energy and the opportunities that it provides us in our lives? So with that, I'm going to pass things back to Vivek, who will kick off our first panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. I now invite Jason Bordoff, the founding director of the Center on Global Energy Policy, to moderate our first panel on Energy Opportunity Lens. I also welcome to the stage Dr. Diana Hernandez and Andrew Kamau, the managing directors of the Energy Opportunity Lab.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. So as you heard, I'm Jason Bordoff on the faculty at SEPA in the Climate School. I direct the Center on Global Energy Policy. And this is a really exciting day for us. It's a day long in the making for the center. And I'm really thrilled to be here to formally kick off one of the most exciting new endeavors we've had in many years, in our 10 years. 10 on this pen right here means we're 10 years old at the Center on Global Energy Policy. Our Energy Opportunity Lab. Something we announced at COP27 last year, promised ourselves we would have up and running before the next COP. So just under the wire, we are here today to bring it all to you and talk about what this new effort is going to do. Really extraordinarily proud to have this tremendous team helping us build this. Do want to say a word of thanks to Beth, who is in the back, who works very closely with the chair of our advisory board at the Center on Global Energy Policy, Matt Harris, whose generous philanthropy is a major part of the reason we were able to get this work underway. So this inaugural Energy Opportunity Forum is a really exciting day for the center. You can't work in energy and climate policy, as I do, as many of us do, and I think fail to appreciate the profound inequality that exists within the global energy system. I won't repeat all the numbers that Melissa shared. Many of them are known to you, but per capita electricity consumption in OECD countries more than 50 times higher than that in sub-Saharan Africa. She talked about the nearly 1 billion, around 700 or 800 million people who lack any energy access at all. And last year was the first year in decades that number actually went in the wrong direction and is getting larger, not smaller. And I think a lot of the work that we'll talk about too, and that this Energy Opportunity Lab will focus on, is not just in some of the lowest income countries in the world, but right here in the United States. And that's a lot of the work Diana, her several other people who are here today, champions of environmental and climate justice like Shalanda, who you'll hear from, and Destiny, one of our faculty, visiting faculty members. That when I speak to groups, that's even more surprising to many people, to understand the 25, 30 million people in the US who experience some form of energy insecurity on an annual basis, who were forced to make decisions when asked that they had to forego spending on food or medicine in order to be able to afford basic energy services, or leave their homes at unsafe temperatures. And those are things that I think I was aware of, but I will say that the work Diana has done and the work this Energy Opportunity Lab, even for me, has brought front and center in a way that I'm not sure I always fully appreciated. And I see that reaction with the groups I talk to. I was just talking to one yesterday and shared some of the work from the fact sheet you helpfully put together a couple of weeks ago, and people's eyes are like shocked by these numbers. And the impacts of the energy we do use are also really unevenly distributed. As I think many of us know, the worst impacts of climate change already being visited upon those who are most vulnerable, and in many cases have contributed least to the problem. That, of course, with greenhouse gases, what matters is cumulative emissions, not just the annual flow of emissions, and somewhere around half just under half of cumulative emissions are from the US and Europe, around 2 or 3% from the continent of Africa, for example. And a history of environmental racism has meant that right here in the US, the pollutants and the waste from energy use disproportionately affect communities of color, historically disadvantaged and low-income communities. So addressing these problems isn't just the right thing to do, it's also essential to the mission of the energy transition. It's essential to the work of accelerating a clean energy transition, because I don't think you can accelerate it if you don't make sure that everyone comes along equally on that journey. And for the energy transition to sustain the momentum that we need and the popular support for it, it needs to prove that it is going to redress some of these wrongs that have characterized the energy system for a very long time. So that's why bringing together community leaders and practitioners and policymakers who are deploying and developing really innovative sustainability solutions is so important. Like the group we have assembled here today. And that really is a guiding mission for the Energy Opportunity Lab that we have created and launched at the Center on Global Energy Policy. So 2 of those extraordinary leaders are here on stage with me now, and thrilled they're on stage, but even more thrilled that they are colleagues and have agreed to join us here at Columbia at SEPA at the Center on Global Energy Policy to help lead this Energy Opportunity Lab. Dr. Diana Hernandez is Managing Director of the Domestic Programs within the Energy Opportunity Lab and Associate Professor of Socio-Medical Sciences at the Mailman School of Public Health here at Columbia. A sociologist by training, her work looks at social and environmental determinants of health and has studied the impacts of policy and place-based interventions on the health and well-being of socioeconomically disadvantaged populations. And then Andrew Kamau has been a friend for many years, and he is the managing director of all the international programs within the Energy Opportunity Lab. Previously was the principal secretary for petroleum and mining in the Ministry of Petroleum and Mining with the government of Kenya, charged with undertaking all the technical and policy efforts in the energy ministry for the government of Kenya. And through his life's work, I've seen over many years, Andrew's applied himself to the energy sector's challenges and opportunities, particularly in the African continent, noting the resilience of developing economies, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, going to require some new and innovative thinking and require bringing a different lens and perspective to a lot of the international climate and energy work that we all do every day. So there's a lot to cover here, not a lot of time, and a really robust agenda. So first, just please join me in thanking Diana and Andrew for leading this effort and for being with us today. So I kind of want to start just by letting you introduce yourselves in a more fleshed out way than one is able to when reading a bio for the group here to understand how your journey, what kind of work you have focused on in your career, and what your agenda is to be able to accelerate and further that work through the effort that we've built here with this Energy Opportunity Lab. So, Diana, let me start with you. Tell us what led you to be here today and what you're going to do moving forward.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge all the friendly faces in the audience. And if that is a testament to anything, it's that we are a community and that this community has existed. We haven't always had the platforms to come together in this way. And so for that reason, first of all, I'm really grateful that you all are here. There was lots of enthusiasm for this event, and I'm grateful for that. Personally, I feel like my journey has been an interesting one with many, many pivots. I'm trained as a sociologist and am a New York City native, which I will get back to in a second. And basically, in my academic journey, I landed in public health by a very fortunate accident. It's an applied field, and I needed a job. And I started to work in HIV and AIDS risks, actually, as I transitioned from my PhD work, which was on housing and health, and how legal services could help to mitigate the relationship between housing and health. But in that process of interviewing people in their homes, it was very evident that there was something going on in their homes that was not well documented in the academic literature. And I started to kind of characterize that work and operationalize it as energy insecurity. And to be talking about the kind of core dimensions of this phenomenon that was hiding in plain sight, but behind closed doors. And that's exactly what, in some ways, the work that I've been doing has been championing, which is to kind of bring it to life. As an academic, we kind of meet milestones, and my milestones have been, going through the tenure process. But as someone who emerged from a community of need, doing research was never satisfying enough. So I grew up in Section 8 housing in the South Bronx, and that has in many ways shaped the motivation to do this work, which in some ways is about representation and making sure that people like me who have achieved these positions in traditional and privileged institutions get to talk about and validate realities on the ground. And I'm looking at my team. This is not something that I have been able to do by myself. This has really been a joint effort. But the Energy Opportunity Lab for me actually means making the work actionable, translating research into policy and practice to make change. I think a lot about it as energy research in the public interest, and that to me really motivates me at this stage in my career and in my life, and also recognizing that so many people, Shalonda and others, are making things happen at the policy scale that we also need to kind of be in conversation with. So I'll end there.
Thank you. So excited to have you here. Work together. This is fantastic. Andrew, same question to you. Sort of help people understand where you come from, your background, and the perspective you're going to bring to this work, and what you see as the opportunity for an Energy Opportunity Lab.
Jason, I read somewhere the other day that the essence of a picture is actually the frame. And somebody was saying that if you want to draw a giraffe and you have a small frame, now of course you have the freedom to draw the giraffe with a short neck, but you will not then have a giraffe. So I think here what we're trying to do at the Energy Opportunity Lab is to broaden the frame into more than just energy access and what does it mean to the lives of people. I think in my career I've been involved in really, first of all, as in the private sector, in the oil and gas space, and then later in mining, electricity, and then how you speak to people in government. Private sector people are very critical of governments. We always believe that we can do the job better. And so, I got told, okay, since you are so clever, why don't you join the government and see what you could do? So that's how I wish I had met her before, then I would have known not to go. But so of course, those of us who've been in government know it's a very big machine. And so I ended up in government. And you have to figure out what is it that you want to do. And I was very fortunate because when I got there to the government, to the Ministry of Energy, one of the things that we were doing is, by accident, I think, or many people say it's on purpose. The government then had decided that they were going to provide internet-enabled devices to all primary school children. And, it went to court, the people who won the contract, so that it was delayed for 2 years. And in those 2 years, we discovered that out of the 28,000 government primary schools, only 8,000 had electricity. So you're not going to have an internet-enabled device if you can't charge it overnight. And so the government embarked to electrify all primary schools. And, next to primary school, you have a market. Next to the market, you have housing. So that's where the last mile connectivity was born. And so within 8 years, we went from 22% energy access to 70% energy access in 8 years. I think it's the best track record anywhere in the world ever. But I'll tell you something really funny. So, of course, as part of the last mile, we credited everybody's account because we have prepaid meters. We credited everybody's account with some money to allow them to use the system, the electricity. And after 1 year, the Auditor General came back and said that we had installed non-vending meters. What does that mean? In 1 year, the people who had the electricity never bought a credit. So whatever we had thought was their requirement was more than they could use because they had a light bulb and maybe they had a cell phone. That was it. Yet, they were still going outside their house to cook with charcoal, firewood, and other forms of biomass. So it didn't sit well with me, you know? And then so we started the whole LPG program. And we grew it from, in the same period of time, from 2.5 kilograms per capita to 7.5 kilos per capita. We knew there was a problem with infrastructure, expanded infrastructure from 2,500 metric tons import storage to 30,000 so that we can bring the cost down. And many other things that have happened subsequently since. And then, you know, one thing that you realize when you're in government, you're always running. And you need some time to think, to sit down and think about it. And this is where the center comes in. Because, you know, you provide some evidence-based research. You're able to collate data in a trusted way. Because governments, they're very suspicious of people who want to collect data. Why do you want to collect the data? What is it for? What are you going to use it for? And I think you need a place like this where you really, you're here just to provide evidence on what's really going on. What you do with that is another story altogether. So I think I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you. I have a lot of follow-up, and I saw Melissa, our research director, nodding forcefully. Collect the data, collect the evidence, and then let's think about what to do with it. Let's make sure it's actionable, and we provide policy recommendations and advice and help to people in decision-making roles, like the one Shalanda has now. But can you said something which I think is important, which is, you know, I've often heard you talk about, almost recoil a little bit, I don't want to put words in your mouth, when people talk about energy access and thinking about energy for development, which is a phrase I often hear you use, when we think about the challenge of not decarbonizing the world's energy mix and at the same time meeting growing energy demand. And that energy demand growth is not just what it might take for 700 million additional people to charge cell phones, but have meaningful levels of prosperity and mechanize agriculture and have some degree of industry. Those are really big numbers. And so talk a little bit about that challenge of meeting the decarbonization and climate challenge, but making sure that we're being honest about the amount of energy that it takes to deliver even a fraction of the level of prosperity we take for granted.
Yeah, you know, look, I mean, look, these guys who I told you who have this you know, non-vending meters, it's because, you know, that's not where the business is. But they are doing business somewhere else, running on, public transport, three-wheelers, two-wheelers, milling of maize, which I'm sure Vijay will speak about later, welding. There's a lot of enterprise going on out there, but it's not necessarily on the grid because the grids are not maybe that stable, or the prices of electricity are just too high. So you need to provide a way for young people, and especially with the demographics that are there in Africa today. You know, I think we're saying by 2050, 1 out of every 4 people will be in Africa. So, and with a median age of about 19, compared to the US, which will be like 38 by 2050. How do you create employment for these people? You know, and these are the things that you need to figure out. How do we make it cheap enough, the power cheap enough, that people create industry? They have irrigation, they have cold storage, they have whatever other industry is going on. This is what energy for development is. Manufacturing is leaving. It's going to other places where power prices are cheaper. Beneficiation of mining, agricultural value addition. There's so many things that one can do.
I want to ask both of you about an incredibly important set of issues, right? billions of people around the world who not just no energy access at all, but not nearly enough energy for meaningful levels of prosperity, and we got to make sure we're meeting those needs in a way that doesn't exacerbate our climate challenge. And then the work you do, Diana, in our backyard in Harlem here, people struggling to afford basic air conditioning bills, or communities that are negatively impacted by the environmental impacts locally of extractive industries or other industrial activity, sort of on and on. Both incredibly important topics. Many organizations work on issues of environmental justice in the US. Other organizations are working on issues of energy poverty around the world. Why bring them together? How do you think about the idea that we've brought these broad issues together and what the concept of energy opportunity, the frame we're putting on that? Talk a little bit about what that means to you and how we should understand the intersections between these.
I'll just kind of paint the picture. Not a giraffe, but I want us to kind of have the sense of a home that is thermally uncomfortable, where the temperatures are so high, for instance, that all you can think of is a shower to cool, but you don't have an air conditioning unit to turn on. Or the inverse, that it's so cold that all you can do is stay in bed to be warm. That is an unproductive environment. And when we think about productive uses of energy, oftentimes we're thinking about this on the global scale and in the global south. And I think you've painted pictures also of the many uses and how hard it is to get around and to do the necessary things in life when you don't have adequate access to energy. And so these conversations, to continue to have them in silos as if they are not, first of all, kind of very reflective of the other, and then also to think about the limitations and solutions is a big lost opportunity. And I think that this is actually what we're trying to bring to the fore when we think about energy opportunity, is both to recognize that these are issues that are happening that have many synergies that operate in parallel. We also have a parallel existence where we're kind of cross-pollinating on the idea side, but also recognizing that the sets of solutions and approaches must be tied to the kind of conditions on the ground and the resources and other set of factors to work with.
Jason, where New York is now, they're by 2050, 13 of the largest cities in the world will be in Africa. Some of them have not been built yet, you know? And it's important that we see what's happening here. Should we build in the same way? Do these houses need to be the same way? Absolutely.
That's what the New York skyline looks like, pretty much.
Exactly. Is that what we need to do? And can we build better? Can we have houses that are more energy efficient? And, you know, we always, it's so interesting, some of the things that we discuss, for example, in places like Kenya, you know, we have different tariffs depending on your usage, and of course, depending on your income, which you don't have here, which is so interesting. And people want prepaid meters because they can control the way they pay their bills and the way they consume. In the US, they don't want prepaid meters because it's seen to be a stigma of you can't afford, so you're a poor person, and so no one wants a prepaid meter. So there's so many interesting things that are the same, but not the same. You know? So I really find the cross-pollination very interesting.
Maybe a concrete example. You've had such interesting pieces of work you've done in the past connected to policy, thinking through how to work with utilities or decision makers. I'm just wondering if you give like a concrete example of something where you see a problem, you bring research and evidence to it, changes the way we think about it, and then there are outcomes, things policymakers can do, things others can do that maybe weren't obvious before. Give us like a sense of maybe something you've worked on like that.
So, I mean, that definitely, it covers kind of a big range. Early on, a lot of my work was about the impacts of energy efficiency and also clean heat transitions. I just saw Daniel Carrion enter the room. And thinking about who's left behind. New York City went through a whole transition to phase out the dirtiest fuels. And the buildings that were still are using, relying on polluting heating sources are uptown. They're in the Bronx and they're in northern Manhattan. So when I think about the state legislation like the CLCPA, which I always forget, Climate Leadership and Community Protections Act, and Justice 40. I'm thinking about basically directing resources to disadvantaged communities, communities that have actually not seen the levels of investment that are necessary and that put them on par with other communities. So when that is mandated in policy and entrenched in law, it actually makes that possible. And we're not necessarily just relying on kind of market, activity to draw that work out in part because policies do help advance and close equity gaps. So on the housing front, there's the clean energy transition. And then more recently on bill affordability, there's a lot of work, and I'm always heartened by when people recognize my name mostly, and I'm in these like kind of policy and practice circles, and they're toying with the ideas. They really are trying to figure out, how do we make bills more affordable? How do we protect? How do we expand disconnection protections so that folks aren't being disconnected on the basis of non-payment when that's a much more fundamental question and issue. I work with the Department of Health here in New York City, in Maricopa County. Lots of practice-based partners that are really trying to figure this out. I see Lauren in the audience. So that's what I see. I see folks, on some level, there's been advances, but I also see lots of interest and a big commitment on the part of folks that are outside of academia, toying with the ideas and trying to figure out paths forward.
I want to be a little forward-looking in the remaining minutes we have in terms of what the agenda is, what you hope this Energy Opportunity Lab will do, what success looks like. And also, I'm kind of curious, just to start, for what ingredients will be necessary for success? What do you think we have to get right? And in particular, I'm thinking about the partnerships that have to be built. Columbia is an extraordinary institution in many ways, research and evidence. It's kind of one of the great research institutions in the world, tremendous students and faculty here. It's one that's had ups and downs with the community we work with. It's one that may or may not be trusted in certain communities. And I'm from New York and show up in Kenya. I'm here to help, and how people react to that. So I think, you tell me, it's going to be effective, needs to do that in significant degrees of partnership with all sorts of institutions and communities. But can you talk a little bit about what that means to you? What do we have to get right to make sure that this has the impact it can have? Maybe Andrew and then Diana.
I think one of the things that we need to do is, a lot of government people and private sector anecdotally know what the problem is. I think the issue is that, how do you prove it? How do you know? We had gone off to Kenya with Vijay some time back, and he's done some interesting research. And the question was, so you hear if you read Western newspapers and go to conferences, that renewables is the cheapest form of power anywhere. Yeah, it's there. When you actually go on the ground, it's not true. But nobody can really tell you why. And I think one of the things that we really need to do is quantify some of these things. Is it a policy issue? Is it a tax issue? Is it a finance issue? What is the real? And each country will be different. And we need to figure out, there are many tools that have been there in the past, what are known as least cost power tools. And these are some of the things that we need to try and help people figure out. How do you build them? What do we need to change in order to scale up renewables so that we don't follow a pathway where we are convinced that the only way to go is coal or fossil fuels. Stefan and I always wonder, for example, the Inga Dam in Congo. Why has it never been built? The Grand Inga, yet it's the cheapest power in the world. What is the reason for that? So these are the things that we need to grapple with and work with not only MDBs, but also funds and other policymakers. Plus, the other thing that is really interesting is that there's just not enough research and R&D at local universities in country. And if we can use that to help them, because like you talked about trust, governments probably trust that once those institutions collect the data, something can happen. And we were in Kenya with Angela at EDF, and the minister said, look, guys, can we work together with your university here in Nairobi to see how we can train people about climate? Everyone uses these terms interchangeably: climate finance, carbon finance, energy finance. It's all interchangeable. So what does it really mean? And I think this is where we really come in.
The partnerships we need to build to be effective.
Yeah, I have to say that, part of this, I was just having a conversation this morning about longevity and how in some ways, like, the work is about staying committed. And when I look around the room, I look at people and people that are representing organizations, Daphne Rose Sanchez, Jasmine Graham, folks that have literally been at this work for a long time and need trusted research partners to assist. So sometimes they're trying to understand the impact of their own work. Or we as academics are trying to understand, what does this actually look like? What's the impact of some rollout of a program? And how do we then get to evaluate those impacts? Those relationships, the trusting relationship, ensuring that projects are published, that you actually get there, like, all of that is a part of the process, but we can't have justice without ethics and integrity. And so with the undergirding of ethics and integrity, that is what academics can offer, that it isn't necessarily about trying to push an agenda or trying to reap all of the benefits that can come from doing research, but instead that it's really focused on impact. And I think when we have, I have to say that working with Andrew has been just such a delight. First of all, he's an amazing storyteller. And, I so respect you, and I'm so honored to work with you. But to me, again, people that have been proven in the work, to be able to say, hey, I have this question. We get called, Vivek could attest to this, Chandrasa, all the time from people that are just looking for research partners. So there's definitely a demand there, and we are actually coming in with an attitude of research as service. And when you do that, it changes the game. It isn't necessarily about research for its own sake around knowledge production, but it's also about research for the purposes of impact, but doing it in a way that is trusted.
Final minute for each of you, but just talk about what success looks like. I mean, the research is incredibly important, but I think we've invested in this with the idea that if the outcome is research papers alone, that's not success. So what do we aim to achieve with research that is actionable, that is actually connected to decision makers? And you need to build the capability to bring the research to decision makers to try to drive real change. What does that look like to you, Diana, and then Andrew?
For me, it basically looks like households have the energy that they need for life, for health, for well-being, and that happens domestically and globally. So that definition and that aspiration is important. And that to me is, the definition of success would be that policies, programs, and a mentality around that has shifted and is basically adopted without question.
I think for me, what success look like is there's a lot of, first of all, no doubt that there has to be some change in the way we invest. The cost must come down. We have to address the issues of risk, perceived or real. And we have to figure out which are the real ones and which are the perceived ones. And the more we do of the more projects we do, the lower the risk will be.
Because he worked with us on sort of thinking about currency exchange risk,
Exactly.
which raises the cost of capital, makes it harder to put capital to work for clean energy projects
Exactly. So for example,
in some parts of the world.
yeah, so for example, cooperatives in Africa, they do a lot of things. They're in agriculture, they're in public transport, they're in real estate, they're in financial services. The third largest bank in Kenya is owned by the cooperatives. But you ask them, why are you not in energy? There's just all this mysteriousness about energy. Yet, it's in all our lives. And if we can get people to know what they don't know, I think then we would have succeeded.
You can all see why we're so proud and excited to have Andrew and Diana leading this work for us and the fantastic team that we've pulled together to do it. Really proud to call you both colleagues, and I know you're both exceptional, and you could be doing this work anywhere, and the fact that you're choosing to do it within the Energy Opportunity Lab we built here at SEPA and the Center on Global Energy Policy is really humbling. So it's fantastic to work together, and just so excited to see what we're going to do as we move this forward. Please join me in thanking Andrew and Diana.
Thank you so much, Jason, Diana, and Andrew, for that very thoughtful introduction. I was going to request people to move to the side to make room, but I see that we're packed. So, okay. And so that's a good segue to our next session. So one of the center's primary objectives, as Jason mentioned, is to bridge the gap between academia and policy. And we're honored to have with us today an exemplary academic turned policymaker, the Honorable Shalanda Baker. She's the director of the Office of Energy, Justice, and Equity, the Secretarial Advisor on Equity, and the Chief Diversity Officer at the U.S. Department of Energy. She's the architect of the historic Justice 40 initiative, the Racial Justice and Equity Action Plan, the Energy Justice Policy Framework, and the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility efforts at the department. And before joining the Biden-Harris administration, she was a professor of law, public policy, and urban affairs at Northeastern University, and she spent over a decade conducting research on the equity dimensions of the global transition away from fossil fuel energy to cleaner energy sources. So please join me in welcoming Director Baker to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Look at all these familiar faces here. It is so great to be here. I'm going to try to stick to the time allotted because I have so much to say today. First of all, I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez, for inviting me to be a part of your launch, this launch of this amazing event and this amazing lab that is really focused on the issues that have been so near and dear to my heart for so long. Thank you, Vivek, for that warm introduction. And to all the organizers who are not on the program, whose names you'll never know, thank you all for making this event possible. And of course, thank you to SEPA and the Center for Global Energy Policy for inviting me here and for making a space to talk about and address and elevate energy justice. So in my remarks, I'm going to challenge us to think about 3 questions. The first question is justice possible in this energy transition? Is justice possible in this energy transition? The second question is, and this is a hard one, are freedom and liberation possible in this energy transition? Are freedom and liberation possible in this energy transition? And the third is, how do we avoid the mistakes of the past? And when I talk about the mistakes of the past, I'm talking about having certain communities disproportionately bear the burdens of our energy system while receiving so few of its many, many, many benefits. So how do we avoid the mistakes of the past? And before I dive into these three questions, I need to share with you my priors. I am the daughter and the granddaughter and the great-granddaughter of environmental injustice. I'm also the daughter of energy insecurity. And based on the last hour or so of discussion, I know you know what energy insecurity means. I'm also a former project finance lawyer, a recovering lawyer, and I have spent the last decade of my career, almost 15 years actually, of my career arguing that we need to be looking at the equity dimensions of this energy transition. So just needed to level set a little bit so you know where I'm coming from as I attempt to answer those three questions. So I'm the daughter and granddaughter and great-granddaughter of environmental injustice. My dad, Charles Baker, grew up in a place that many in the energy world know, Port Arthur, Texas. So Port Arthur is the birthplace and the epicenter of the modern fossil fuel industry. It's a place that's still so toxic in 2023 that communities are asked to just go inside and avoid the toxins that are being spewed into the air illegally and impermissibly by industry that is there. We have petrochemical facilities. We have one of the largest oil refineries in the world right there in Port Arthur, Texas, which is a low-income Black and Latinx community that has really been gutted by industry. But yet there are millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars actually made right there every single year. So I was actually there on Monday. It's been a week for me. I was there on Monday to speak with community members, and I can affirm that that place is still struggling in so many ways, economically, environmentally, due to the impact of the fossil fuel industry in that community. So Port Arthur sits in the Golden Triangle. Another community is Orange, Texas. Another community is Beaumont. And it's called the Golden Triangle not only because of the wealth that has been generated in that area, but it's called the Golden Triangle because if you look at that region of the world using satellite imagery, it lights up at night due to the density of development there. So the people that I talked to on Monday come from families just like mine that are dotted with gaping holes in their family trees due to the deaths that have arisen as a result of the industry there. Folks have died so prematurely of cancer, heart disease. They still suffer from asthma. They suffer from serious ailments as well as a result of the infrastructure there. So the environmental justice literature calls these places sacrifice zones. They're called that because they're sacrificed in health and life expectancy to ensure that we have access to cheap energy. And we want to make sure we don't do that as we broaden access to energy globally. But these are sacrifice zones, and they're so emblematic of some of the core issues related to the choices that we've made with respect to the energy system. So energy injustice doesn't just exist in a place like Port Arthur on the Gulf Coast, which is, again, really familiar to many of you who work on energy issues, but it exists here in Harlem. It exists in my hometown of Austin, Texas, where I grew up in a household that was headed by a government worker, a woman who was a middle-income government employee. But we, too, had to make difficult choices every single month about how we would become safe in our homes. There are nights I can remember where my mom had to boil hot water on the stove just to make sure we had hot water for a bath. So that type of incident, as well as using, ovens to warm the home just to knock the cold out for a minute. Somebody's nodding in here. Electric blankets, space heaters, these are the things that are the picture of energy insecurity. So we, like over half Black Americans, were energy insecure when I was a kid. So shortly after the election, the president-elect asked me to lead our nation's energy transition, to ensure that it will be just and equitable, to ensure that no community like the one my dad grew up in, no household like the one I grew up in, would be left behind in our clean energy transition. So that leads me to our first question. Is justice possible? Is justice possible in this energy transition? So let me just be honest with you. Sometimes I feel like I was asked to do an impossible job. Really, an impossible job. As I mentioned, this week I traveled to Port Arthur, Texas, but my team also traveled to Lake Charles, Louisiana. We traveled to the river parishes right outside of New Orleans, also known as Cancer Alley. I was in Austin just a couple days ago. I was in Houston just a couple days ago. And what is clear is that the energy system is not immune from the structural racism and structural inequality that pervades our criminal justice system, our healthcare system, our transportation system, and the many, many systems in our nation that are designed to protect us, that are designed to provide goods and services to us. So sometimes it does feel like an impossible journey that I'm on, but I'm so proud to do the work because I'm able to lead an office that we just renamed the Office of Energy Justice and Equity. Thank you, yes. We just renamed the office to reflect not only what's at stake in this moment of transition, but also the direction that we need to go as a nation. So the office I lead actually has been around since 1978. And it's the office I didn't know about when I was asked to lead it. It's the office that people who apply for DOE funding don't know about. But it was formed in 1978 to address the social and environmental issues that communities of color, that's in the legislation, that communities of color face vis-a-vis the energy system. The office was designed to develop a research program investigating the social and environmental impacts of the energy system on communities of color. It was designed to advise the Secretary of Energy on issues of energy policy and how we can design our programs at the Department of Energy to ensure that communities of color have access to departmental resources. And when I talk about communities of color, I'm talking about not only people, I'm talking about businesses as well. I'm talking about wealth creation. So my office has been mandated to do all of that, and it wasn't until now that we've actually had the strength. And when I talk about strength, I'm talking about dollars. I'm talking about attention and a policy imperative to actually do that work. So we were formed to address structural issues, and you've already begun to hear about what those structural issues are, but let me just be clear about what they are. From our own data collected at the Department of Energy, our own data tells us that BIPOC folks pay a disproportionate amount of overall household income to meet energy needs. We also know, thanks to the work of Diana Hernandez, and also thanks to our own research at the Department of Energy, that energy insecurity, the inability to meet household costs, the pervasiveness of keeping your home at an unsafe or unhealthy temperature, and making those difficult choices about whether to heat or cool your home or eat, that affects 1 in 3 Americans. It's not getting any better. The Pulse survey tells us that it's still a problem. So we know that 1 in 3 Americans is facing that, but we also know, again, that 52.2% of Black households experiences energy insecurity. Yeah, every time I say it, it's mind-boggling. And 47% of Latinx households experiences that. This is a precarity that certain folks face as a result of the structure and design of the energy system. And that's unconscionable. So my office has really endeavored to rewire the agency, to rewire how we do every single thing at the Department of Energy to make sure that we address those issues. So in response to the first question, justice is possible, but we have to stay focused on the ways in which inequality is insidious. It's not accidental. It's embedded in our rules, it's embedded in our processes, and that is how injustice is unwittingly replicated. And when I talk about our rules and our systems, I'm talking about our regulatory process. I'm talking about the systems of benefit distribution. I'm talking about the legacy of racism in housing and neighborhood design that contribute to energy injustice. So we're trying to get at all of that in this energy transition. So now to the second question, because I know I didn't get a lot of time this morning. Let me get to the second question. All right, how are freedom and liberation possible through the transition of our energy system? So we have some mighty, mighty, mighty tools right now, unprecedented tools in our toolkit to get us toward an energy system that creates freedom and liberation. 7 days into this administration, the president signed Executive Order 14008, the climate order, where he said we're going to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad. We're going to do that also by rebuilding our economy, and we're going to do that by centering racial justice and equity. And in Section 223 of that executive order, he said we're going to make the commitment and set the goal that 40% of the benefits of all of our spending on climate and clean energy are going to go to frontline communities. They're going to go to communities that have been overburdened and underserved by government services. And so that was on day 7. The question on day 8 was, how do we do this? How do we do this? So I've been at work for the last 3 years or so running, as someone said, running to build the architecture to make sure we deliver on that unprecedented and historic commitment. At the Department of Energy, we have $100 billion to spend. And someone I knew in the environmental justice movement a long time ago told me, yeah, Shalonda, it doesn't matter how much money you get, because all that money is going to flow through a system that is itself unequal and unjust. So that stuck with me. And so at the Department of Energy, we've also been building a framework to tackle that structural inequality as the money flows, and we've done that through community benefits plans. It's imperfect, but it certainly gets us a step closer to addressing head-on some of the structural inequality and structural injustice. Community benefits plans are now required for anyone who wants to avail themselves of Department of Energy resources. They have to have a plan for stakeholder engagement. They have to have a plan to deliver on Justice 40, so that's job creation, that's business creation. They have to have a plan for DEIA, which means they have to partner with diverse businesses, underrepresented folks. They have to create a diverse workforce, and they also have to partner with HBCUs, minority-serving institutions. So that's never been done at the Department of Energy. It's certainly made some shockwaves in industry. They were like, how do we do that? We've never had to talk to people. We thought we were just going to take this government money and run. Well, it's a new day. It's a new day. And so communities like Port Arthur that are the result of choices that we made in the early 1900s now might have some opportunities as we transition the energy system to one that is clean. So I'm going to turn to the final question on the table, and that is, how do we avoid the mistakes of the past? How do we avoid the mistakes of the past when it comes to communities disproportionately bearing the burdens of the energy system while receiving so few of its benefits? So we need folks like you all to get in this game. That's why I'm so excited to be able to launch this, to be a part of your launch day. We need researchers that are doing the analysis with rigor and with heart every single day to make sure we're true to our commitments and goals and our values. So we need that analysis, that evaluation now. And we need folks to start asking research questions about equity in the energy system, the structural questions, the systemic questions. These are questions that were unpopular when I got in this game about 15 years ago. But now is the time to begin to ask those questions. And we need students, like so many students I see in the room, to take this up. But I am not worried about the students because I know that you get it. You get that the climate crisis is wrapped up in racial inequality. It's wrapped up in lack of access to resources. So I know you have solutions for us. So as I close, I'm really hopeful. Every single day, I wake up wondering how I can do this work another day. There was a young lady in Austin when I was there on Wednesday at the Texas Energy Summit, and she came up to me and she said, "Oh, it's so great to meet you." And she said, "Can I just ask you, how do you do this? Do you get tired?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm tired." And she said, well, do you want to give up?" I'm like, "Yes, I want to give up." And she said, "Well, what keeps you going?" And I said, "You keep me going. You keep me going." And so, y'all, let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Baker, for describing those pathways, but also your commitment to advancing energy justice. Our next panel discussion will dive deeper into some of the policy and practical solutions for addressing energy insecurity in the United States. So I invite Diana back on the stage to moderate this panel. And please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Gerard, the founder and faculty director of the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at the Columbia Law School, Dr. Destiny Knock, assistant professor of engineering and public policy at the Carnegie Mellon University, Sonal Jessel is the director of policy at VACT for Environmental Justice, and Chandra Farley, the chief sustainability officer of the city of Atlanta, Georgia.
As we wait in this transition, I just want to, first of all, acknowledge that Shalanda just took us to church. I feel like we needed that. Thank you so much for your incredible work that put you in position to do this, and just for your staying power and leadership in this process. We need you. So whatever we can do to continue to inspire you, thank you. All right. Are we good? Yeah? Oh, okay. I think, yeah, Chandra, come sit next to me. We now have a panel on energy insecurity and the kind of approaches that folks are taking from the various places where they sit. And so we have a lawyer and a faculty person in the law school and the climate school, Michael Gerard, who I have the pleasure of collaborating with, Destiny Knock, who has been with us all week and just showcasing her brilliant work on energy equity gaps and the lived experience, which we'll talk about, of not having enough energy for life. Sonal Jessel, who I just am so proud of her. She was a student at Mailman and then has just developed into this wonderful leader she's as a director of policy at WEACT. And Chandra Farley, who, oh my gosh, I just remember doing a community teach-in with you in Atlanta and just being so admired by the work that you've been doing at the Partnership for Southern Equity, and have also just appreciated all of the ways that your work has evolved. And so we're going to get started. And Vivek will keep me honest. But I'm just going to go in the order to my left, starting with you, Michael, and ask you, what are some of the projects that you're currently working on to address energy insecurity in the U.S.?
So we've been working with you and CGEP and the Sabin Center and the Energy Bar Association on a project concerning energy security. And we recently released a report on the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which is the largest U.S. program to try to address energy security. The report came out a couple of days ago. It's on the CGEP website. It'll be on the website of the Sabin Center in a couple of days. And would you like me to get into the detail now, or should I do that a little later?
Yeah, just give me the top line.
Yeah, and so the top line is that it's a federal program that is helpful but not nearly enough, that a lot of state legislatures and state public utility commissions are also requiring their utilities to provide energy assistance, ratepayer assistance to a certain extent. It's not everywhere, it's not sufficient, but it paints the picture of what can be done if enough resources are devoted to trying to address these issues.
Excellent. Thank you for the hopeful note. All right, Destiny.
There it is. Okay, so for me, a lot of my work focuses on how can we identify at the individual level who is experiencing energy insecurity or different aspects of energy poverty. And so I develop algorithms to try to find these people. So to get a sense about who's in the room, who here actually has an air conditioner in their house? Okay, so the statistics say about 90% of New Yorkers, so that sounds about right. Who has a window unit, though? Okay, right. So, given that during the Canadian wildfires, all of you were told to stay in your homes, I wonder how many of you actually replace those filters in your window units very often, right? And so when we think about our strategies for telling people how to protect themselves against air pollution, protect themselves against disasters, right? That is a really big thing. And then in terms of looking at New York's own data, it says about 50% of those that live in public housing don't have access to air conditioners. Now, there are some strict government conservation laws that actually prevent electric and gas utilities from encouraging people to use more energy. And when I have gone to utilities and said, there are people that don't have ACs, they say legally we cannot encourage them to buy one because we can't encourage them to use more energy. And so when we think about our climate adaptation strategies centering around air conditioners, our protection against wildfire smoke, to tell people to stay inside, if these things are happening during a heat wave, we are putting people that are already at risk. And so we need to think about how our strategies might impact some of these people, and then also finding those people, because they're not going to be the ones that have high bills. They're not going to be the ones that we see these huge spikes. They actually look really efficient from an energy standpoint because they don't use that much energy. And so that's what a lot of my work focuses on, trying to think about these different insecurities that your work and the work of the government have highlighted that people do to try to make sure that they can pay their bills, try to make sure that they can just survive in their home, and then how can we think about different strategies to help them make a better life for themselves and their family.
Okay, that was great. Hi everyone, Sonal Jessel, Director of Policy at We Act. We Act is a community-based organization that's based right here in Harlem. And since 1988, we have been working to build healthy communities. And we started out just in Harlem, in northern Manhattan, but now do citywide, statewide, and federal policy work as well. And on the energy side, we're working a lot on the Justice 40 initiative, where money is going. Something that's really important to us is really addressing how utilities make decisions about our energy future, and that's something that we've been very involved in, is really getting into the weeds in the regulatory processes in New York State, as well as helping other environmental justice organizations do that in a more national perspective. Something we're very interested in turning the tides on is how money is distributed to environmental justice communities, either through the money that they've paid, through paying their utility bills, or through money that is coming from the unprecedented funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the New York State Bond Act, which is a $4.2 billion pot of money that now can be used to kind of improve infrastructure in New York State. So there's a lot of opportunity that's out now that our organization is working on. How can we actually make that money get to communities, and also how is that actually used to build multiple generations of wealth and ownership and revitalization in communities that haven't been able to do that in the past. And what's also really important in the work that we've been doing lately is all around energy and security, all around energy efficiency work. How do we ensure that people are safe in their homes as we're making a very large energy transition? So, the thing that we talk about a lot is, if we're moving towards more electricity use, what happens to people's utility costs? If New Yorkers that are renters living in apartments currently not paying, a lot of them don't pay for heat, what happens when you all of a sudden are electric and start paying for heat? So something that we are working on a lot is how to really secure people in their homes, make sure that they aren't, that the increasing costs from upgrading a home, from changing the way your utility works, doesn't displace you. And that's something that we're working on, because it is quite a gap in the policy space, both in New York and nationally, is how are we protecting people in this process on that buildings level. So that's just a snippet of stuff that we're working on in the energy space, and certainly working on LIHEAP, which we're really excited for the paper that came out, because that is a very important program for ensuring that people are able to just simply have that emergency energy access that they need. especially as New York City is getting hotter and we need to use a lot more electricity. So there's a lot of work to be done, but those are just some examples of what we're doing. Maybe say the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Chandra Farley. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Atlanta, and feeling like a mama I made it moment to be here with Shalonda Baker and Dr. Hernandez and Destiny and Sonal on this energy justice journey, I will say. So City of Atlanta is a pretty big city, and our Mayor Andre Dickens has a vision that really talks about one city with one bright future, and it starts out with safe, healthy, connected neighborhoods. And when I think about that, that's a vision on environmental justice for me. You'd be hard-pressed to find a community-based organization, an environmental justice organization that isn't talking about safe, healthy, and connected neighborhoods. And being in local government now, trying to say things like energy justice, trying to say things like environmental justice, it can feel lonely. And so I'm definitely on the practical solutions side now. So having an energy burden reduction program, I think, is the one thing I wanted to talk about that we're working on now. We just launched a program called Weatherize ATL, and it's focused on preserving affordable housing, building, creating healthier homes through energy efficiency retrofits. But the first thing we did is start with a round of community organizing and community canvassing. And I got asked, like, well, why did you start that way? And it's like, well, we're inviting people who are feeling these burdens into community with us. We're not just offering this program. We're just starting. We're not even really sure exactly what they need. We know why we're starting it. So our engagement team just knocked on 2,400, it's my timer, 2,498 doors. Out of those number of doors, we got about 200 surveys. Out of those 200 surveys, there's probably like 130-ish that are actually homeowners, right? Because we have to start with homeowners. Out of that, we're probably gonna get 50-ish who will actually be able to move forward with a visit for an energy efficiency audit. And so I wanted to start with that because there's so much wrapped up in that program. One, the community organizing wasn't just about letting people know about the program, getting them to fill out the survey. This was a power building exercise around understanding, why do you even need this program? What is energy burden? Oh, you don't know who makes the decisions on your utility bills? Well, there's this thing called the Public Service Commission, and it's right here in Atlanta. So it was an education effort. It's a still working with the utility effort. It's an educating the city effort. And it's a workforce job training effort. It's a minority business development effort. So I say all that so to really think about the holistic opportunity we have when we're talking about energy justice for what that really means across society as a whole.
And in some ways, it means knocking on people's doors, right? I mean, we want to, of course, extend the knowledge about services and linkages, but the trust that's necessary for people to open the door, to let you in, to let you work in their homes, right? We have so many steps. Speaking of steps, I'm going to ask some pointed questions. And Chandra, your journey, talk about mama I made it, I feel the same way, honestly, has been just such an interesting one. I want to ask you about the work that you've been doing on the front lines to advance energy equity in multiple capacities. Tell us a little bit more about your journey and where you think key gaps still exist in public participation and procedural justice to close gaps and achieve energy opportunity. And the last time I saw you in person, you said, I've been thinking about and I've been talking about energy opportunity. And so I just also want you to kind of tell us what you think about energy opportunity and then tell us about your journey.
Yeah, so I come from buildings. I love buildings, and I think people think that starts with because I worked at South Base Energy Institute, which is a buildings sustainability nonprofit in Atlanta focused on the Southeast. But it goes back before that. Went to architecture school, worked in building design and construction. But I grew up in a small town in Tennessee called Gallatin, and one of my daddy's hobbies was to buy old houses and fix them up. It wasn't called flipping back then. It was just what he liked to do. And then he would rent those houses out to people from our church or some of the women that worked in our restaurant. And what were those women in the restaurant talking about? They were talking about the light bill. And so, hearing those conversations, but then also running around on foundations and looking in and out of, stud walls and those kinds of things. So, and also I was raised by my grandparents. And so being Black in the South, they remember not being able to vote. They went to segregated schools. Those schools were my elementary schools, the same buildings. So that intersection of culture, history, civil rights, buildings really set me, I feel like, on the path. And I remember when we did a lot of trainings, meetings, and events at South Face. And I didn't get to South Face because of my buildings background. I got to South Face because of ARA. So working in building design and construction, when the housing market crashed, my job disappeared, almost literally overnight. And so I went back to what I knew, which was hospitality, because I started waiting tables when I was 9 in that family business. And I got to South Face because they needed someone to set up the trainings, meetings, and events programming. But while doing that, I had the buildings background and was working on our facilities, started working on the facilities team. And so it went on from there. And so I remember in one of our trainings, I was in the hallway where we set up snacks, and there was this Black woman standing there. And we were doing maybe a lead RRP training or something like that. And we're talking about weatherization. And we heard something about cracks in the windows, not closing your windows. And we both kind of looked at each other like, you mean putting the towel in front of the door my grandmama used to do? I'm like, yep, just like that. So it was there at South Face that I really felt like strategies and that we innovated, Black folks, poor folks, wherever you want to say, putting the towel in front of the door, shut that door, you're letting my air out. All of these things that we inherently knew and depended on because we knew it saved money, because, we didn't want to draft in the house, had been repackaged and sold back to us as something that wasn't for us, something that we didn't inherently understand. Now it's a really confusing utility program or this weatherization assistance program that's always oversubscribed or you don't even know about. And so it was there working with nonprofits. So I ended up leading our Grants to Green program, which was a program focused on providing technical assistance and funding to nonprofits to make energy, water, and resource efficiency upgrades. And so I didn't have the energy equity language then, but that's exactly what that was, because it's now a federal program, and the person who ran that program after me is now at DOE running the Renew America's Nonprofits program. But it's true, the more money a nonprofit saves on operations, which includes utilities, the more money they have for programs and services. So for a Boys and Girls Club, it was an Atlanta program, and expanding that nationally, I worked with Boys and Girls Clubs, Feeding America, and the Food Bank Network. So what does that look like? Well, 3 food banks in Alabama, when we saved about $60,000, from some LED lighting retrofits, some HVAC optimization, that's almost 200,000 additional meals that they were able to serve. For a Boys and Girls Club who, LED lighting retrofit, we were funding it, so the payback was starting right away. That was 2 additional art teachers they were able to hire in the summer, 300 additional children they were able to serve that year. So that was really where I started to, and then the energy equity language started, and I went through the EPA's Environmental Justice Academy and knew I wanted to get back to community work, which is a lot of what I had done, and that led me to Partnership for Southern Equity. So then it was energy burden, and learning about energy burden. And City of Atlanta, if you look at a map of City of Atlanta, it's a black-white city, okay? It's half and half, bisected by Interstate 20, which runs east to west. That's a legacy of redlining, a legacy of disinvestment, the legacy of the federal highway system that split the city in half. Well, that's where all our energy burden populations are. That's where 90% of the black population in the City of Atlanta lives. Energy burden, lack of health insurance coverage, low birth rates, all of these, air pollution, all of these things are concentrated right here. And so that was really the beginning of like, okay, well, who's in charge? Oh, the Public Service Commission? Okay, well, we need to do something about that. So then just like working with people, organizing, talking about this really important thing, mainly because it doesn't have to be a problem because we know exactly what to do. Like this isn't some mystery about how people should not be burdened by utility bills. It's a political will issue. It's not a technological issue. It's not a money issue, really. It's a flow of dollars. It's an allocation of dollars. So those are the kinds of things that have shaped and I think after like 7, 8 years of talking about energy burden, I was just tired, talking to communities about why we're put upon, why we're disadvantaged. Now, talking about people and referring to people as low-income people. Have you ever heard anybody that wants to be referred to as that? Like all of these things. And so it was just, I was getting ready to give a talk, actually, with HG in Atlanta. And I was like, because I talk about the trifecta of insecurity a lot. I mean, that has been so formative for this work for me and for other people when you're able to connect utilities to housing and food. I mean, it's just, and I've always felt like health is the gateway drug to energy. So being able to talk about that, and I was like, well, we should talk about, this is a trifecta of opportunity, particularly in the City of Atlanta. We have a housing mayor. He's got a goal to build or preserve 20,000 units of affordable housing in 8 years. That's a huge effort. But we know that one of the main drivers of displacement in the City of Atlanta is inability to afford utility costs, our Atlanta Housing Authority. And so talking about energy burden, we saw like a 1% reduction over like 4 to 5 years. And it's like, oh, are people having more access to utility programs? Is it because people are? No, it's because they can't afford to live in the city. That's what's shifting this change in energy burden. So going out on doors now, talking about weatherize, yes, Atlanta is top 3, 4, or 5, depending on what data set you look at for energy burden in the nation. But people are aware of the burden. People know they're tired. People know. So what is the opportunity? And I just feel like that's a great responsibility, particularly in this federal moment. This moment that we're having here today is a way to call people in for opportunity and excellence and leadership versus a negative.
Absolutely. We think about it as moving from problem-centric kind of terminology and a focus to solutions, and also, in this more positive framing. People want that, and I think people also want to be validated in their experience, and also given credit, right, for doing all of the work. Destiny, you do so much there. I might actually just turn to you, and then we'll get back to. So Destiny, you're a brilliant researcher trained as an engineer and contributing to public policy through your interdisciplinary research. Can you tell us about how you're using publicly available energy usage data to understand the lived experience of energy insecurity for impacted households, and how are you using this work to shape policy?
So I think that one of the things I'll just say is I try to do this on 2 fronts, because in our first panel, we talked about not wanting to leave the work in a paper, right? And I think, I was trained as an engineer. My dad told me, you should be an engineer because you can get a scholarship and you won't be poor. I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good, right? And so for me, I came into the energy space because my dad told me I could get a scholarship, and I really wanted to be a high school math teacher. I was going to save the world one child at a time. right? And so I actually double majored so I could get my scholarship for engineering and then I could do what I wanted. And then I went to teach in high school, and those kids made fun of me until I cried. And they made fun of me for crying, right? So it did not go well for me and there. I already look young, and I looked even younger back then, right? So then, I was left with this, well, that didn't work out. And I have to try to find what I actually like in engineering. And I realized it was all about, I wanted to get connected to the people. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'm trained as this person who codes, who looks at technology, and I haven't seen people in not one of my classes, right, in terms of what we evaluate. So then I did a study abroad in Africa, and I saw a lot of wind turbines that weren't turning. And I was like, wow, we deployed a ton of technology and nobody's using it, why not? And so that was my introduction into let's try to get some data around this to try to uncover why do people not use the technologies once they have them, right? And then how could we have done it better? And so then that was a huge eye-opener in terms of, well, did you actually ask people what they wanted to use it for? Did you actually ask people why they didn't adopt the technology on their own in the first place? And just donating the technology doesn't mean that they are going to use it, because sometimes they don't know how to use it, they don't know what to use it for, and they don't see how it could better their life. But then on the other hand, you have some people that really want that technology. So then I went to the Virgin Islands to look at offshore wind to deploy there. And they also had a lot of wind turbines on shore, but they would say that they are not willing to wreck their coral reefs to put offshore wind turbines there, because the problem also is that their onshore wind turbines also weren't turning. And you're like, okay, well, why not? And they said, well, it's because our salt content is so high that when it is humid, the air is just filled with salt. So all of the components in these wind turbines rust within 2 years. So they don't last 20 years. They last about 2 years, and then somebody has to replace those components. And so then that really indicated to me that the people on the ground are not able to give the knowledge of why these things aren't working. I had gone back to UMass where I did my PhD, and I tried to tell the professor that, and he goes, that's not a thing. I was like, the energy minister told me it was definitely a thing. And then he was like, so not only was I a student who was not listened to, but then I'm like, he has a good job title, and he's not listened to either. And so then that really indicated to me that if I wanted to try to have some say in how we could make these systems more effective, how we could try to get multiple voices into these things, you do have to have a position of power. And to do that, you either have to try to get the power yourself, or you have to be connected with people with power, right? And to then think about, okay, how can I do that? And so, I'm this data trained person, so I feel really fortunate to work with people that have been in the community doing the work, talking with people, because I feel like I always learn so much from you all. And then I kind of take it back to, how can I make this into a computer model that will scale, right? Because, it's great to go to 2,000 homes, but then what happens next year? Do we have to go to the same 2,000? Can we replicate this? Can we scale this? Is there some data indicators that can indicate, who did we miss in that 2,000? Because the way that I came to this energy poverty space was actually, I never really thought that I was energy poor. And my dad would never have claimed that we were poor. We made it, right? He's an engineer. And, I do remember, though, the thermostat wars between my mom and my dad. My dad is from Maryland. My mom is from Alabama. It was always too cold in the house for my mom. It was always way too expensive for my dad, right? He didn't care what the temperature was. No matter what it was expensive. And I remember, waking up and realizing my dad had turned the air conditioner up to 80, and I wake up with a headache. And my mom would be like, the kids are getting a headache, just leave it alone. He's like, oh, don't worry, just go take a cold shower, And so that was kind of my underlying introduction, but, it was just a thing that my dad and my mom argued about, right? It wasn't poverty, or it wasn't being low income. And then in grad school, I was living on about $12,000 a year, and I lived in a house without AC. And I didn't want to buy a window unit, and people were like, well, why don't you just buy one? And I'm like, well, I would, but I kind of want to buy other stuff, like food and, gas for my car so I can go to school, right? And so then when I'm thinking about these trade-offs, like I also was like, I'm not poor, I made it, right? And then eventually I moved to an oil house. It was very expensive, but we didn't have high energy burden because we would cut off our heat when we went to work. And so, I realize now that we were one of those invisible people because we didn't have high energy burden, but we were also strongly at risk of having our pipes freeze, which now as a landlord, I learned from my tenants, a very expensive lesson, that if you actually lower your heat to the point where your pipes will freeze, it costs you $6,000 to replace all those pipes, and then another $30,000 to rehab the entire home to replace all the water damage, cabinets, toilet, and floors. And also, we had to remove our Section 8 tenant, so for people that don't know, Section 8 is a housing voucher program. It will pay a portion of the rent for households in need. We had to kick them out on Christmas because legally I cannot let you live there anymore because I ripped out the sink, all the cabinets to replace all the pipes, and you don't have any water. You don't have any water for 6 months as I'm trying to rehab this house, right? And so that was that's how I came in to energy poverty. And so when I think about data and publicly available data, I think it's really great that we have, the REC survey, a lot of, information coming out of Shalonda's group, your work on the LAHEAP program and Low Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, and like where the deficits are and why aren't people signing up for these things, and to highlight the problem and the need, right? And then I do think that we need some of that private data about how much energy people are actually using in their homes to become more public. I know California has legislation where they're trying to make a lot of that data public, but they, are also thinking, how can we make sure that privacy of homes is protected, right? And that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges of trying to find people that are energy insecure. It is an invisible problem because, for all of you that told me, you have window units, if I had a program that said, I will replace your filter for free, you might not sign up for it because you might not think that you need it, or you might not think that you qualify, right? And so how do I find people that are struggling but maybe don't want to admit it? How do I find people that don't have low energy burdens, but it's because they're cutting off their heat when they're going to work, and they're at a strong risk of having their pipes freeze and losing their housing, right, before they lose it. And so, I have the professor side, that's where I do all the research, and then recently we launched our startup company. It's called People's Energy Analytics, if anyone wants to look it up. And that's where we actually go in and we work with utility companies to use their data in a better way, right? Like, how can we use this data to find houses that need different interventions, that are experiencing different types of poverty? We've done the research in Chicago, Arizona, and the Mid-Atlantic region, so that's like Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland area, and been able to look at like 1 million homes and find, that in Chicago, there's a certain area that you're going to target for the high energy burdened homes, right? And so now instead of just saying, hey, let's go talk to these zip codes, you can click on the zip code from our dashboard, and then it will pop up every single address that you need to go talk to, right? And so that's a different type of targeting than, trying to do these community scale. And I wish that we could just scale that, to the broader US, but it does take, a while to try to get utilities to sign on to these programs. And, so that's one of the things I'm doing on these two fronts. I've been talking with regulators about, how can we actually encourage utilities to do this, because we can see who has a health risk, right? And, that's gonna come from tying some of this energy usage data to the health data, right? To verifying it by going into these homes and actually asking, are you experiencing these insecurities that we believe, the data points to? And so I think that it has to be, a mix of public and private data. But I think that we're at a great opportunity. And then just as a fun fact, anybody that wants to look up the original, so here we call it energy burden for that 10% of income that you spend on your energy bills. In the 1990s, the British called it fuel poverty. And it was a modeled thing. So it wasn't actually like the actual percent of income that people spent. But they actually said you shouldn't spend more than 10% of your income to heat your home to 18 degrees Celsius, right? Which for all the non-international people, that is going to be roughly I have to double it and add 30. right? So 66 degrees. Okay, 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I think sometimes that's the part that we miss. It's not just do you spend less than 10% on your bills, but do you spend less than 10% on your bills to be able to heat your home to at least 66 degrees, right? And I think that second piece is a really important piece that often gets missed in some conversations. I feel like here we would all be like, yes, we should do that, right? But when you go talk to an engineer, make sure they remember that second part.
All right. Oh my gosh. When you have such talented people, it's hard to keep time. I am going to ask that you all keep your comments a little bit shorter. So Michael, I'll start with you and then make sure to leave some time for Sonal, just because I feel like your comments will be much more directed. So you're recognized as having pioneered cutting-edge legal tools and strategies for addressing climate change. And we've recently been collaborating with the Energy Bar Association on an energy and security initiative. From your vantage point, what are some key legal, policy, and regulatory levers that can be activated to ensure that households have the energy that they need to live and thrive in the U.S.?
So the LIHEAP program, as I said, is the most important program we have in the U.S. It started in the 70s amidst the OPEC oil embargo, and it started out as just a weatherization program, but it has expanded considerably. It's a block grant program where the federal government makes chunks of money available to each state, and the states then have a great deal of discretion in how to use the money. Congress typically appropriates on the order of $3.7 billion a year for the program nationwide. Trump tried to zero it out, to eliminate it, but Congress wouldn't let him do that. Our study found that there are several issues. Only about 16% of the eligible households actually sign up for it. Part of it is there isn't enough money to really serve all the eligible households, and part of it is in some states, and I said states have a lot of discretion in how it's run, have such difficult application processes that people who are eligible don't sign up. And another issue is that in most states, it covers only heat, not cooling. And as we've talked about, cooling is actually extremely important. And we know that extreme heat is the largest cause of death from natural disasters in the United States, more than hurricanes, more than floods. And only some states provide cooling. And the states that do provide cooling, it's typically to buy the air conditioning, but not to run it. So as we've talked about, people can't afford to run it. In about 30 states, public utilities also offer assistance programs, not necessarily voluntarily. They've been directed by the state legislatures or the public utility commissions to provide this kind of assistance. It's a lot easier for a state legislator to tell the utility that it has to raise its rates than to raise taxes, and so it's easier to put the burden on ratepayers rather than taxpayers. So there are several kinds of programs that utilities have as required by their states. One is a cap on bills to a set percentage of household income. These are called percentage of income payment plans, and a lot of states have that. Some states have set percentage discounts off the utility bills. Sometimes if you're eligible, it's a flat discount. Sometimes it's tiered depending on what your income is. So California has a program called the California Alternative Rates for Energy program, CARE, which provides a 20% discount off electric and gas bills for eligible households. Some utilities have set bill credits where if you're an eligible household, you get a certain set credit off your bill. There are arrearage forgiveness programs where if you have arrearage on your bills, it'll be forgiven. Typically, in order to be eligible, you have to be making your payments for a particular period of time, and then they will forgive the rest. But of course, making your payments is a real difficulty for a lot of households, so they can't so readily do that. In the COVID pandemic, a lot of states provided more generous arrearage programs, but mostly those have ended. The enrollment criteria vary from state to state and program to program. Sometimes it's based on household income. Sometimes it's based on participation In another program like SNAP or SSI, sometimes it's based on family size or usage, lots of reasons. Many of the programs have limitations. For instance, people can only sign on for a limited period of months, or there are limitations on the number of customers who can join, various other limitations. In terms of actionable steps, what can be done going forward? Clearly, higher annual appropriations to LIHEAP at the federal level would be very useful, and better federal criteria on helping, on requiring the states that participate to make it easier to sign up and reduce the eligibility restrictions. Beyond that, at the state level, pressure on state legislatures and on state public utility commissions to require the public utilities to make more of these programs available, such as caps on the percentage of your household income that can be paid on utility bills, and more generous arrearage forgiveness programs, and other number of things that really are tools that the states and the public utility commissions can exercise to relieve a good deal of the burden.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to end with Sonal in many ways because she's one of us. As I stated, she is an alumni of the Mailman School of Public Health. And for the students in the room, I wanted you all to have a mental model, a role model of sorts. Patty, I see you too. That is doing important work in the world. So tell me a little bit more about how Columbia set you up and how you continue to partner with Columbia for the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. I went to Mailman School of Public Health. I had my degree in population and family health, which is, I think, not really the traditional track that folks take when they go to the public health school. They tend to go through the environmental health department, but I really wanted to look at climate change from the perspective of how are populations affected and take a more global and intersectional perspective to the climate crisis. And so it was important to me to make sure to have that foundation around what does population health actually look like? How do you monitor and evaluate programs? How do you read research and do the research? And really, how do you do community-based participatory research, which is what I'm very thankful for Dr. Hernandez, who gave me that opportunity to work with her and actually go into people's homes, sit down and talk to them about their energy insecurity, learn from them about what they're dealing with in their homes to pay their utility bills, learn how to pair that with actual air monitoring work where you could really document what is going on in this home, both from the quantitative and qualitative perspective. And that has been so important because it's shown me not only as I get very deep into the policy world, but how to kind of take that step back and say, okay, as a community-based organization, how are we making sure that the decisions that we're making on that policy side is informed by the lived experience and the reality of people that are living in Harlem and Washington Heights and Inwood and in environmental justice communities across the US. And so that has been those have been very critical tools for my success in this position, is understanding, one, how energy justice and energy policy is situated in a much larger context. And I think this is a conversation we're having about housing and food and, what it means to be someone who's first generation, what it means to be someone who's low income, what it means to be dealing with all sorts of other sort of social determinants that contribute to poor health outcomes, and really situate the energy policy in that space. And that's, the education that I received here that was really helpful, and also that research experience that I received with Dr. Hernandez that was really, illuminated that for me. And then I was able to take all of that expertise and apply it now to working at WEACT, and has seen a lot of that benefit continue with partnerships, doing all sorts of other research projects. I see our extreme heat friends out in the room that we did, monitoring of northern Manhattan, understanding where are areas that are really hot that need some intervention, specific street corners, right? And working with the WEACT members and other members of the community to help do that data collection and sort of contribute to, well, how do they want to see the issue of extreme heat actually solved on their block? and really push policy based on that. And we've been able to also have a lot of support and thought leadership in moving policy forward, where there becomes very, very complex questions that not just my brain can answer, but that's why you work in coalitions and partnerships with people, because you need a lot of help. And Professor Gerard was really integral. And last year we passed the strongest cumulative impacts legislation in the United States. That's all about protecting disadvantaged communities in permitting processes. And we needed his expertise in how permits are reviewed and how those decisions are made. And that was something that I was able to sort of tap into with the brain trust of this institution. And other institutions, we partnered with some other folks as well. And so that legacy has been able to continue, and now we're excited for this, because now we get to say, hey, we have some active fights around putting a legal energy burden cap in New York State, and we're getting a lot of pushback. And so what kind of evidence do we need to prove that capping energy burden at what we're trying to do is 6% in New York is actually the right thing to do? It is cost effective. It does lead to better health outcomes, and it is worth that sort of upfront discomfort by the utilities, let me say. So the work that I've been able to do has been really helpful. The education I got has been very helpful in that sense, and we're excited to continue to work and think about what are the different questions that we need answered, and not be afraid to kind of bring it here and ask for some help. So we're excited about that future.
We are excited. What a wonderful panel. Please join me in thanking them for all of their hard work and wonderful thoughts. Thank you.
Well, okay, we're about to get started. May I please request everyone to please come back and take your seats. I think we should just start.
I think so. No, maybe you can just say, request silence.
Yeah. All right, we're about to begin the next panel. Welcome back, everyone. Q, Peter, Brianna, may I request you all to help get everyone back? All right, thank you. And again, there are seats in the front, so please feel free to move front. And let's get started. May I request some silence, please, as we begin the next panel? Thank you very much. So our next panel will switch the focus from domestic issues to an international one, and explore ways to unlock financing for productive uses of renewable energy in Africa. And to moderate this panel, we have Jonathan Elkine, is a fellow and senior research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy. And also please welcome on stage Dr. Vijay Modi, professor of mechanical engineering at Columbia University, Angela Churi-Kalhoge, executive vice president of impact at Environmental Defense Fund, and Stefan Rigny, the founder and CEO of Sharm Holdings. So over to you, John. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Vivek, and good morning again, everybody. As Vivek indicated, we now shift from the domestic scope of the Energy Opportunity Lab to an international discussion. In particular, I would like to highlight two elements of the topic that we are addressing here in this panel. The focus is very much on productive use of energy, namely the use of energy for the purpose of poverty reduction, job creation, opportunity creation, to pick up on the theme that Diana Hernandez and Andrew Kamau highlighted earlier. There is also an inherent challenge in having a discussion that is about the 54 very different states that comprise Africa, and having that all in one conversation as if it is a singular body of countries all with identical issues. Nothing can be farther from the truth. Are we okay on the sound? All right. So I am very pleased to be joined by this distinguished group of panelists who are with us this morning. I will note that I'm very regretful that we do not have the fourth member of our panel, Chipidi Moramong, who unfortunately took ill and is unable to join us today. She's with Africa 50, which is probably known to some of you in the audience as an investment fund founded by participating African states and by the African Development Bank, a very important source of equity capital for investment in infrastructure, including energy, across Africa. In particular, I would highlight, as we start this conversation, a couple of data points that Africa 50 gives great prominence to, and particularly that they highlighted at the time of the African Climate Summit that was held in Nairobi back in September of this year. Namely that Africa needs, for power transmission purposes, an estimated $45 billion of investment between now and 2030. $45 billion, and that against a $41 billion power sector investment quantum that was true for the past couple of decades preceding it. Moreover, an important point that 99.5% of the investments that have flowed from international sources into the African power sector have been in power generation, but not in transmission. So this is a real challenge if one's objective is to enable economic activity that responds to what Andrew Kamau highlighted earlier, and that is the expectation, the projection that by mid-century, one in every four citizens of our planet will be African. So it is a zone of huge opportunity if the world chooses to pursue it. I am joined by people who have been pursuing the opportunities in Africa. And Stefan, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind. You have, with Chipidi's absence, you have the honor of being the person who's traveled the farthest to be with us. But you're also somebody that spent a lot of time actually doing power development, power trading, power transmission, and in particular, working with one of the sectors that is anticipated to grow the most, namely the minerals sector. So could you talk a little bit about the gap between theory and practice and what it has taken in your experience to get real projects built, and talk a little bit, please, give us some ideas about where they are as well.
Okay, well, first, thank you for having me here. I'm here thanks to Andrew Kamau. We've been working together for many, many years. First, as a young banker myself in South Africa, where I was asked to help South Africa go into the continent and bring project finance for infrastructure as well as for resources. I'm French-born, Canadian-educated, and I've been in Africa my entire life. And certainly, growing up in a lot of these countries, you realize that power is a predominant factor. I think your comment before is absolutely correct, that you can't paint Africa with one brush. they are very, very different areas. And namely, I'd say Anglophone Africa versus Francophone Africa are two different worlds, completely different worlds. And I work essentially in French-speaking Africa. My main activities are in the DRC and the ROC, but I'm involved throughout the continent. I've focused on infrastructure because it is something that brings impact, tangible impact. And of course, I've chosen to go into power because it is probably the biggest catalyst to development. But in order to motivate the development of power, you need to have a use for it. You talked about using power, but you first have to have access to power, and you have to have a reason for putting in place that access. And for right or wrong, industry is probably the key driver. And industry in many parts of Africa is natural resources, so oil and gas and mining. So our group is invested in mining and is invested in power. In power, we have focused on transmission because it is the missing gap. I think the private sector is very, very geared up to go into production, power production. But distribution is a difficult one to tackle. The gap is there was a recurring theme in the other panels, which is trust. And I think trust is probably the single most important item to be discussed in any type of development. And the gap in raising capital for Africa is someone has to take a leap of faith and put their money where their mouth is. And this is what we've done, where we've done almost everything that we've done on our own equity. And the challenge, and this is why I was also hoping to have the lady from Africa 50 here, because there is a missing link in bridging the trust gap, taking the risk, accompanying the communities, not just putting in place lovely debt structures that I've put in place as a banker in the past, where you tend to try and restrict everyone and put them in a headlock so that they don't default. But someone has to actually say, okay, I'm going to put my money here. If we sink together. And so this is what we've done, and so far it's been good.
Thank you very much for that. Angela, if I might turn to you, you bring a uniquely rich perspective now with EDF, previously several years at World Bank, time before that working with the Swedish Energy Agency, as well as IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. So I'd like to get your perspective on the clean energy development prospects and key opportunities in Africa, and maybe drawing particularly on some of the work that you have done historically on carbon pricing as a potential tool for carbon finance. There's been a lot said in recent months about some of the inherent problems that have been understood in relation to carbon credits. Could you talk a little bit about whether you see them as being part of a solution to move forward on investment in clean energy in Africa?
Thank you. So maybe I'll start off by saying that when I look at the carbon pricing and carbon market arena, African countries have been late to the party. Not by fault of their own, but by a number of factors, because when the carbon market was developing over 2 decades ago, there was a lot of focus on the perceived risks that there were to do business in Africa. The amount of emissions to be reduced were considered very low, so the interest was on the big emitters. So a lot of finance that came through the market went to pretty small projects. And that's the story we hear, because even to this date, 2% of the activities on the voluntary market presently are from Africa. So that's very little. But having said that, carbon pricing is not just about markets. It's also about all the other, should I say, instruments, whether it's through taxation or energy tariffs, that will actually basically afford that price on the carbon, that will basically recognize that. And we are seeing a lot of interest among African countries to consider carbon taxation. But for those who were in Nairobi in September at the Africa Climate Summit, we also heard a lot of enthusiasm for this voluntary market. Why I say Africa is coming late? Well, because a lot still needs to be done to build the institutional capacity, to put in place the right regulation, to get the data to show where the carbon is. And that's basically the current situation. Is there potential to use this as an instrument to mobilize investment? Absolutely. There are some really good examples, for example, in Kenya, in North Africa, even within Francophone Africa, of carbon investments that actually have a potential to scale. So in Kenya, we have KenGen, the generation company, that was an early mover that was very much involved in the early projects crediting geothermal development, has generated several million, I think it's about, they've generated over 5 million credits in the last years. And these are, should I say, examples that one could actually leverage to do much more. A continent with close to 40% of global renewable resources means that there is a significant area where you could leverage the markets, or you could mobilize the power of the market to leverage other forms of capital. What one needs to do is to deal with the issues around risk, whether it is a policy risk or the lack of regulatory frameworks, whether it is the technology risks and the costs that are associated with that. But there are efforts ongoing to try and address that. So in a nutshell, I think that carbon markets and carbon pricing does have a significant potential for Africa. There are initiatives ongoing to try and unlock that. But of course, much more would be needed to be done to sort of build and mobilize that potential. Very quickly on the question of integrity, and we can talk more about it later.
Please, important.
Anyone who's been reading the newspapers of late will see that 9 out of 10 stories on the carbon market are negative. There is quite a focus mainly on integrity around the generation of the credits or the use of the credits. But carbon markets are not only about credits. They're about inclusion, because for many projects, especially in the African context, which are premised in communities, it is a very, should I say, important vehicle to get the inclusion of different, should I say, stakeholders in the activities. It is a vehicle for transparency, because the asset does not exist if you cannot actually document that the action has been taken. And it's a really important vehicle also then and if you use it innovatively, to address some of the financial risks that that exist in mobilizing the finance that Stefan was talking about earlier. So the negativity on the market has been one because of a focus on certain elements. And don't get me wrong, it's not perfect, but it's what we have. And there are efforts anyway ongoing to try and address some of these issues. But I think we need to also be a bit honest about where we see potential and where we see the market falls short, and discuss what needs to be done. So yes, there is also potential to address the integrity issues.
Thank you very much. And indeed, there is a crying need for tools, different tools that can enable. If you look at any of the standard projections for the need for capital, I cited just one very small example, but the thorough need for energy sector investment and power sector investment across the African continent is a huge issue. Of course, the question then is one that comes down to where and in what priority an investor might look and focus. And so, Vijay, with this, I'd like to come to you. A lot of the work that you and your research team here at the Columbia University Engineering School have engaged in is building capacity, working with African academic institutions, doctoral students, postdocs, in order to develop data to inform those choices. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience and the role that an American institution can play working in partnership with other institutions globally and in Africa?
Thank you, and it's a delight to be on this panel with such people with experience. And also the previous panelists, can I start with a brief story to link the previous panel to this panel? I have a towel story also that Chandra Farley talked about, putting a towel on the window, right? When I was growing up, India, summertime, 115 Fahrenheit in the summer. We didn't have an AC, but we did have a fan. I would wet the towel, like a big towel, put it on the tiled floor. And because of evaporation, the floor would get cooler. The towel would dry in a few minutes, and then we would lie down on the floor. It's good we didn't have an AC, because then we would have been forced to close all the windows, and then my mom was cooking with charcoal, right? So it all sort of, kind of brought together that previous panel, right? So I think I want to start with something, just my macro observation, and I'm an engineer, so I have this observation with some tentativeness. At the Africa Climate Week, the three words, development, energy, climate, were generally spoken in the same breath. Coming from India, seeing the tremendous focus India had to put 30, 40 years ago on food, Green Revolution, there was a driving imperative of increasing incomes, food, growth. Then energy came as a way to fill and enable that paradigm. But it was not just energy alone. You needed fertilizer, you needed water, you needed seeds. And then, so my sort of overarching thing is that I think what I see in many countries is that need for that imperative for growth that may be different from country to country. Then energy will fill that need appropriately. And then I think very likely with financing, it will be climate friendly as well. So that's one. And now, role of the university, and this has actually been very tricky. We are in the West. We are in the global North with like $65,000 a year tuition. What do we do? And I think that my actually observation is that having young people on the campus who want to learn and they are willing to go there, listen, have humility, have patience, what Diana called longevity, engage with community, I actually feel as an educator that they are learning from those communities. So they are coming out with it, I believe, with something that can justify the expense, right? So we are not doing something for the community. We are actually learning from them. So I see that, and why that matters is that brings with it a certain attitude, a certain approach, that to start with listening. My first experience actually was with Andrew's predecessor, Nyoike, 15 years ago in Kenya, when he asked a specific question, and we just took it on and did it. We went to Uganda. We thought we were doing energy. We had numerous community discussions, but when the women sort of spoke at last, second from the men at that time, and maybe still today, they convinced me that energy was not their first priority, it was drinking water. We put everything aside for 2 years and focused on water. And that university can do, but if there's a consulting firm from DC, they may not be able to do that. They may not be able to put that. They'll say, oh, but my terms of reference is this, right? So I think in terms of the role of the university, I think, and if we do that, along with the institutions there, capacity building will happen, but not with the goal of it. I think our mission of education will also be fulfilled. I'll stop here.
Thank you. And so underscore and wish to emphasize the point of listening and engaging, which in my experience in the US government, which was where I was before coming to Colombia, only sometimes are governments good at posing questions and listening first, and then developing programs as a secondary point. One of the themes that runs throughout your various remarks is on the availability of capital and what it takes to create the trust, the risk tolerance, the interest to engage, the tools, the data. So let me pose this as a very concerted question to all of you, and I hope you'll just jump in and react to each other. What are the big missing links that make it hard for, in the present day, to see the capital flows that are needed to take advantage of this opportunity? Is it a need for local capital? Is it a need for enabling environments? Is it a need for a little bit more daring on the part of external investors that are coming to different African states? Who wants to kick off? Will you take a jump?
Well, there are a lot of facets to this, and I think it I liked what Dr. Modi said about taking the humility and the time with humility to listen to what is actually needed on the ground. When I listen to the panels that we had previously, what I find amazing is that there's caring. There's actually caring. And in some of the countries that we worked with or in, unfortunately, that level of caring isn't there, doesn't exist. Not because the people on the ground don't care, but it's because the whole framework, that famous picture surrounding framework or frame, just isn't there, doesn't exist. You see things like South Africa is one of the great failures on the energy sector of recent times. That goes to trust. The policies haven't existed. And you're going from a country where the saying is, what did you do before candles? Well, we had ESCOM. And this is a sad reality. You go up in the continent, there's distrust, where the ability to bring together a database of information, tangible information, because there's distrust on the part of the authorities, it's extremely difficult to get down to the raw data that you would need to be able to actually have an impact. So our approach, or my approach, was very much to go in. I've been also in the Congo since I was 14 in Brazzaville, and so and I looked around at what was needed to actually do something, and that's where we got creative. But it takes time and understanding, so I think it's assisting in having this dialogue to understand and listen what's needed by which stakeholder group. And then trying to build a bridge in terms of trusting. And one of the ways to do it is to go with, I'd say, understanding capital that is happy to live with the realities of the ground and not the beautiful theories of this place.
Got it. Please.
Take the trust issue that you've just raised and look at it from the position of from the perspective of the carbon market. The rules and the guidance and how the markets have been designed have been predominantly done by the West, by people who have interests in investing in those markets from the buyers themselves. So in many of the African countries, and if I take Kenya as an example, even though there are people who know the markets and there are people who can design an excellent project and so on, the point is that these rules, the set of rules, do not always speak to the local context because of their absence of being at the table in shaping them. And that does create a certain perception of the market, which of course translates sometimes into mistrust, misunderstanding, a sense that this is going to be something that will just take advantage. It is something that we are trying to work on. I mean, within EDF, many other stakeholders, Andrew and I were engaging with businesses in Kenya, trying to get their perspectives and, see whether we can communicate it back to, on the other relevant fora. We have the Integrity Council that is working on, these core principles that will hopefully, create a better appreciation, a better lens through which we can assess whether market activities are meeting high standards of integrity, and in that, with a strong participation of communities. The other aspect that comes to mind, which relates to something that Professor Modi said, is on the role of universities. India was super successful with the carbon market because the moment they saw the opportunity, they brought it back to the schools of the institutions of higher learning. They were the ones developing the methodologies. They were the ones, thinking through what would the clean development mechanism look like. And in my previous life, when I was working with the Swedish Energy Agency in, origination of projects so we could invest in, we were seeing that a number of those Indian stakeholders were actually linked to those institutions of higher learning. The example I take from there is that to be able to do the same thing in Africa and fast track, the rollout of markets, then we need to start tapping into those institutions because one, they can experiment, two, they will generate capacity, and three, that's the most effective way to institutionalize the capacity and the processes within those institutions because they're not constrained in the same way as some government departments or some private sector entities would be.
Got it. Vijay, I wonder if you might jump in here because I know that you have, in your group's work, you have focused not on simply developing data, as laudable as and as important as that is, but developing data that then can help to drive investment. So talk a little bit about that, if you would, please.
And if I can link to what Angela said, I went to an institution in India. There were 5 or 6 IITs set up. All of them were set up with assistance of US, UK, Russia, Germany, all that. Like that, those IITs were set up with a deep engagement of foreign aid, but there was like hundreds of PhDs being done through that. Okay. But coming back to investments, so I, as an engineer, learned in a wrong way, but I learned it finally that you have to solve the problem someone else has and not imagine the problem. Okay, so about 5 years ago, through our president, through Avril, through all this, the question was asked by Ugandans, we are about to take a $600 million loan. One premise of the loan is we can do household connections to 1 million households, but will that lead to growth? And I almost fell off my chair because the correct answer would be no, right? And I'm like, oh my God, they're asking the $1 million question. What is it that will link and enable economic growth in rural? So I just want to, because, bulk of the population was in rural, engaged in agriculture. And that's when we started a dialogue with multiple ministries, and we concluded with that dialogue that actually agro-processing, irrigation, and some other institutional things were actually the big drivers. So we asked them, do you know? And they said, no, we don't know the scale. Oh, it turned out that, you see, if you are manually irrigating, it may seem free, but it's not free. And you actually are raising an additional crop. So we had done some work in Senegal where farmers don't worry about our home. I want to grow more onions. And so we helped them do that, and that lesson, sort of helped us. It turned out that there are 26,000 rural diesel-using machines, in rural Uganda, and that's not where electrification target at all was. It was all to households. just a sampling of irrigators, 30, 40,000 clusters of irrigators, not a census. And my team is here, so I'm taking credit for all this stuff, but they are the ones who did the hard work. So I think, what that does is enables a country to actually show that there is willingness, ability, and already people spending. So it's not all money having to try to stimulate. There's already stimulation existing. And how can we leverage that? Oh, it turns out it's diesel for a good reason, right? If you use something 2 hours a day, you don't have the grid, the capex for shifting that is $7,000-8,000. Who has $7,000-8,000? And I have to say that all this talk about financing, I don't see it on the ground. I just don't see it on the ground. On the ground, it is 15 to 20% interest and a 3-year return. There is no way solar can be done with 3 years and 15%. So the person who is doing it for a good reason. So to me, the entry point is show that person an alternative, then talk about energy transition. Show that person an alternative that is viable to them. These people are so smart. The moment that it's viable to them, they're going to shift over. So I think why we did this work is to first show that there's a scale of opportunity. It's not one here, right? It's like in tens of thousands of farmers. So if we can figure out a way, and we chatted before about aggregating, about approaching it in a way that it's thought of as a nationally or some other entity-led effort, then the willingness to pay is there. And I want to end with one data point. Okay, so if you have, 6 million households, rural, okay, one of these loads, they are spending $1,500 a year on diesel. That is close to 100 times or 200 times, depending on the location, of what a single household is able to spend. Yet the investment would only be 2 times in those. And yet, perhaps, we are all at fault that whole SDG 7 got interpreted as only household access. So the investment disproportionately went there. So anyway, I'll stop there, John.
Well, this is terribly important, and I mean, it kind of puts the spotlight on the difference between disaggregated load and demand versus very aggregated demand. And if I understand properly, Stefan, your activities have really focused on some of the big demand centers, the minerals, et cetera. What would it take for there to be more Stefans willing to take the time and invest in the knowledge base and understanding, knowing the people and knowing that demand to meet some of the more rural but clearly existing demand that Vijay is talking about?
Well, from my perspective, we were approached by several of these equity funds who loved what we were doing, because we were doing trading. We were also putting in place some infrastructure, and we had the mining side that had a captive clientele. And they spent months and months and months studying, doing due diligence, and said we loved it, only to be turned down by their credit committees because they said, oh no, it's in the DRC. It's in the Congo. And I said, well, you could have saved a year's worth of work if you had just started there. So understanding where you're actually going and why you're doing it, it would be a good thing. I think a lot of those funds are actually just set up for the fees because they get to raise capital, they charge management fees and deploy capital, and they'll go and look for blue chips that'll make their lives easier. But when it comes to actually being on the ground, and deploying capital where it counts in a way that it matters, it's a very, very scarce resource. There's very little understanding equity capital. So you have the entrepreneurs that try and do it, but you need a lot more of that.
So it sounds to me, if I understand your argument properly, Stefan, you're saying it's not the lack of the opportunity, it's not the lack of bankable projects, it's the fundamental risk appetite issue that is at issue
For
here.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, maybe one quick example of how we got into trading. Congo-Brazzaville put in place a lot of generation, gas to power. It put in place some hydro. The one area that it didn't invest in is in distribution. Transmission existed, but consequently, the population wasn't getting the distributed power, but the power generation was being generated 24/7 and going promptly into the ground, or going to clients that didn't pay. And so I actually approached them and said, well, could I monetize your loss? Because I knew that there was an interconnected grid into the DRC all the way to Katanga, where we could service a bankable clientele. But that's only because I've been in that environment. I set up the first public-private partnership with the DRC, Andrew was involved, where we rehabilitated a turbine on Inga 2, 178 megawatts for $35 million. That's the cheapest power in the world. All of these opportunities are there. They exist, but it takes time, dedication, understanding, and not just seeing that, Africa is scary and it's a very risky place. There are tons of opportunities.
Well said, thank you. Well, look, let's do a quick parting shots if you have any that you wish to. I'd like to ask first Angela, then Vijay, then Stefan. Missing elements of the conversation as far as you're concerned, important things that merit re-emphasis. Any parting views that you might have?
Given that I'm not speaking as an energy sector investor, but looking at it from the lens that I've been looking at, which is leveraging the instruments in the climate area, I think Africa really is the unexplored opportunity for carbon finance. So there is so much potential there, so we should not lose sight of that because of what I consider to be, to a large degree, perceived risks.
I want to be concrete. Going into COP28, last year, UAE, ADNOC, Mazda, they're really the same thing, offered Uganda 1 gigawatt of solar at concessional finance. First of all, Uganda is producing roughly twice the electricity it can consume right now. Okay? It's actually paying for the double the electricity than it's able to use. So every use of electricity today would save them money. Okay? Besides that point. But how will that get implemented? They will give that project to Mazda. Mazda doesn't know how to do distributed, so they will put a giant few hundred megawatt of solar, which is not, what they need is 10,050 megawatt of solar. Sorry, 50 kilowatt of solar. So I think if we can change this conversation before COP, that it's the distribution. It's unless you invest in the wire, but that wire investment is also significant. But it is somehow seen that giving, and this has been offered to Angola, Ethiopia, Zambia, several countries, that is the world's concession, so to speak. But I feel that's what's needed, not needed. So when I go to COP, that's the noise I'll try to make.
Last word is yours.
All right. I guess it's, again, a paradigm shift. We have to change the way that we look at these markets as enormous, beyond here there be dragons, so let's not invest there. It is an environment that's extremely rich in opportunities, I think focus is put maybe on obviously low-hanging fruit, or what is perceived as low-hanging fruit. That's what generation by very large corporations has been the key focus, but transmission and distribution will go a very long way to addressing the access to energy. Then you can also look into renewables. Renewables are fantastic, but you need people to consume them, to consume the power. So yeah, paradigm shift, I'd say.
Well, so we end on the word opportunity, which seems rather fitting for the program today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists, Stéphane Rigny, Angela Churi-Kalhauga, and Vijay Modi.
And our final panel for today will explore how energy and climate stresses contribute to conflict and migration, particularly in the context of recent developments in Haiti. And I invite my colleague, Andrew Kamau, to moderate this conversation. And it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Martin Kimani, Kenya's permanent representative to the United Nations. He has recently served as the President's Special Envoy for Countering Violent Extremism, as the Director of Kenya's National Counterterrorism Center, and in strategic initiatives in the Executive Office of the President. And I turn it over to you, Andrew.
Martin, welcome to Colombia.
Thank you, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay.
So, you have a very interesting history, being Director for Counterterrorism in a very rough neighborhood. Also, been at the Security Council for some time, and have the dubious distinction of being in the same category as K-pop stars, and according to your son, Taylor Swift, with having more than 10 million views on your YouTube channel. Those of you who don't know, Martin is a YouTube star. So we are in a very, you've heard the stories about the opportunities in Africa, but there are some very interesting dynamics that are taking place right now. And there was a recent study that was done by one of the companies that said that young people, what really worries young people in Africa is unemployment, the management of the economy, health, water supplies, infrastructure, education, crime and security. Climate is nowhere in that picture. Yeah, but it impacts all these things that we're talking about. The last National Determined Contribution paper from Kenya said that one of the reasons why we were really interested in climate is because there was the backdrop of flooding and droughts. And actually, they seem to happen back to back and have been happening back to back, where in 2008, there was a huge drought where there was a loss of about $11 billion worth of infrastructure. 500,000 people had no access to water. We had an influx of about 3.4 million refugees from the neighboring countries. And then in 2011, we had huge floods where we had 230,000 people displaced. Of those, 150,000 were children, 700 schools were closed, and 8,500 hectares of crops destroyed. And then we come to 2021, where Kenya has been going through a 4-year drought. 80% of livestock in the north dead. And because of the instability in the region, the inability to control locusts also affected the way the crop production in Kenya was. Now, two things, climate and energy. Why are they so important for national security in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel area, and where do you see us going, especially with the kind of demographics that we have?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. It's a bit surreal to be sitting up here with you because I've known you as a colleague in government. And as you know, in government, you only ask hard questions behind closed doors. And now this is a very open forum. I must say that I've learned a lot. First, I want to congratulate you on the first year anniversary of the Energy Opportunity Lab. And I have to say, through seeing you engaging here at Columbia, it has really brought home to me just how much great work is happening here. So I want to acknowledge the center and also Columbia. And just the last panel here, listening to Vijay was very interesting. So I'd like to just warn everybody, I am completely ignorant on matters climate change, completely ignorant on matters of energy, except that meeting Andrew a few years ago in government made me actually change the way I thought about energy. I had previously thought energy is one component of many that you need to live. But actually, I came to now regard energy is much more than a single component. It is the core of human productivity, of development, of prosperity, is built on energy and having sufficient energy. And so for a peace and security person such as myself, I was used to thinking of energy and security on the basis of geopolitics. What was American geopolitical strategies for its energy security, and what did this mean for its relationship with countries in the Middle East, and then what's our relationship with those countries? And so there was that total mapping at the top level. But as a professional, as I got into security, I realized that the energy issue is also at the local level, at the very bottom. It's driving conflicts and is part of the conflict mix. So I was director of the Conflict Early Warning System of IGAD, which is a Horn of Africa intergovernmental organization. And this conflict early warning mechanism specifically is focused on border communities that tend to be pastoralists. They tend to move around a lot. And the impact of extreme weather events, whether it's floods or famines, whether those are caused by climate change or not, but if we focus on the extreme weather events, they are a major driver of the security calculus on the ground. So as famine spread or there's lack of water and pasture, there has to be movement in search of that water and pasture. And that then leads to armed conflicts on the ground. And then those armed conflicts are not just merely, oh, get out of the way, I need water and pasture. They're shaped on the basis of ethnicity. They're shaped on the basis of ideology. It can appear to be a farmer versus pastoralist conflict. It can take the shape of a religiously inspired armed conflict. And then that, in turn, creates such high levels of insecurity that the state's ability to have a monopoly on violence is fundamentally questioned. And because of that, we come back to Stefan's risk issues. When you try and get the finance, people say, I'm not going to finance. The place is on fire. People are fighting. And so you get this vicious cycle. And the pressure is released by movement. It's released by movement. It's released by having an AK-47. And so when we were in the Security Council, Stephanie is here, and we chaired last year the Security Council group on climate and security, which is an expert group, an attempt to get the Security Council to learn. Now, those of you who know the Security Council know that it actually is not a learning institution, but one tries. And of course, the Security Council is very top-down. It thinks it is mostly located in the geopolitics of great states and what they do and what the rest of us must endure. So to try and discuss climate and security and energy from the ground up was very, very difficult. And so my argument today, if there's a single argument I have, is that the energy people have to get together with the security people to understand that energy development and investment have to be done together with security at the bottom. Energy access, energy poverty, energy justice has to be linked with peace building and conflict prevention. When we're doing peace mediation at the local level, or we are putting together a peace deal, we need to have the energy people in the room, because some of the dividends of having peace need to be having access to energy that enables you to grow your productivity and to have a better life.
You know, Martin, when you look at countering violent extremism, I think you were very successful in rehabilitation of combatants, people who had gone into ISIS and these kind of organizations, and then having come back into the country. What made the program so successful? Was it a development issue? I mean, what was it?
Well, as we sit here today, there's at the General Assembly, there's a briefing that's been going on this morning on Gaza, and when I took up the role of director of the National Counterterrorism Center, it was after a period in which Kenya had suffered exceptional losses of our citizens and innocent lives, so really brutal attacks. And the president changed his entire national security team, and he brought me, who's not a security person, into the heart of the security system. And the idea was not for, I don't know how to kick down doors. So the idea was not for me to kick down more doors. The idea was in our own little space to find what are the other means that we can bring to bear. And so what we've learned since Al-Qaeda attacked New York, what we've learned since the Westgate attack in Nairobi, is that the kinetic response, even though necessary, is not sufficient. You will not ultimately succeed. So you have to have different tools to bring to bear. So what we did was to expand the toolkit. We brought in preventive approaches, for instance, distinguishing between a young student at a university who's reading literature by Al-Qaeda and being able to chew gum and walk at the same time and say, this is a young 18-year-old kid. He's confused, maybe he's a bit angry about something. He's trying to find his political feet. Well, that's quite different from an operative who's planning to plant a bomb in a truck and drive it in somewhere. And the ability to distinguish this two tells us this young student, rather than punishment, only requires assistance, some form of mentorship. And that the primary person to engage this person is not a police officer, it's not an intelligence officer, it's somebody else. So we brought in more such approaches, which required us to win more trust from a public that tended to be very scared of counterterrorism, because some of our tactics and strategies had been sufficiently aggressive, as is the case for all counterterrorism forces globally. The fine line between going too far and not going far enough is constantly shifting. It's very difficult. We also devolved our strategies and brought in much more coordination at the ground level between agencies, a lot more exercising. And inside that coordination, we also brought in civilians and NGOs, not necessarily in the hardcore intelligence-led operations, but in terms of how do you bring in the community because it's their children leaving the town to go to Somalia to fight. It's mothers who have to hear that their son or daughter died in Somalia in an attack, or what is a suicide bomber, and then the whole village is scared of you and your family. So we tried to do that, and then we tried to bring in a sort of whole of government. And whole of government, anyone who ever says they brought whole of government approach is basically saying they failed. But what I mean by that is that we try to bring in a lot more institutions into the mix, whether it's a Ministry of Education, to train teachers on how to protect students, not just from recruitment by terrorist groups, but from drugs, from gangs, from criminal organizations, to create a safety environment, which we try to drive forward. So I think that, in coordination with what other agencies were doing, led to a lowering of attacks, but not an elimination of them. Kenya is still dealing with that. So when I think of the development aspect, I don't think development is sufficient to, quote unquote, stop terrorism. And by terrorism, I only mean an ideologically driven political movement that has a political ideology of revolution using terror against civilians. Development is not sufficient, but the ability to create jobs and opportunity minimizes the number of recruits that these organizations can draw on. It lowers their credibility when they claim that you, on the basis of your identity, are marginalized or are targeted actively by the state or by the powers that be. It raises the legitimacy of the state. It strengthens the social contract. And all these protect the country so that terrorist attacks become painful but not existentially threatening. And at the time when Kenya was in 2013 and in those years, terrorism, we had decided to describe it as an existential threat on the basis that it sought the dissolution of the Kenyan state. And so development is critical if you're going to actually make terrorism sort of a chronic, painful disease, but one that you can survive over a long period of time. And that's why energy and energy access and energy equity really should lie at the heart of how we build peace.
I think the part that is mainly missed in this whole thing about where you have people migrating to another area is the environmental pressure it puts on the host community. You know, maybe they're used to cutting a few trees every couple of months for their firewood, and now you have an influx of 10, 20,000 people who then denude the entire landscape. And as you know, there is then a downward spiral on nutrition because you can't cook protein and things like that. And like you said, the whole conflict between the indigenous community that's there and the community that comes in.
Vijay said something really fundamental. People are smart. People are smart. People know what they want out of their life. Mostly. We all make mistakes, of course. But mostly people, and especially when you have very little, you have to stretch very hard to make it go far. So you think really hard about the options in front of you. So when we here at the UN, we talk in such elevated terms about energy transition. And when you think of that word energy transition, you just see a smooth movement from a Toyota that uses gasoline to a Tesla. It's just a smooth transition. Yeah. But the energy transition at the local level is an entirely new way of living. If you move around in search of pasture, what does it mean? What does the energy transition mean to you? If you're told, okay, settle down, states have a love of attempting to get people, pastoralists, to settle down. And when you're in government, when you see people moving around, it bothers you slightly because why are they moving around? They should have set addresses where if the police are arresting you, they know 64 Morningside Drive. But when you move around, you're in Central Park and then you're in Brooklyn, but people don't know. So The schemes to settle people, there's a great scholar at Yale who really talks about this, whose name I always forget. The schemes to settle people, first of all, tend to be very violent schemes by states to force people into villages, to force them to quote unquote progress. So what Vijay was saying, what options are you giving? If this person counts their wealth in the head of cattle that they have, and that head of cattle needs a certain amount of pasture, a certain amount of water, well, if you want that person to buy into what you're offering, you're going to have to show there's no need for you to move around. Your cattle will thrive where they are. And you have to give them the choice. When I've seen those people forcefully moved off that choice, they usually end up as urban poor, desperate. When they had their cattle, they were wealthy people. In fact, many of you cannot afford some of the very basic ceremonies that somebody in northern Kenya does growing up. Because if you turned the cow into dollars, very few people have that many dollars. So we have to, energy transition is not just about kicking down doors, police, getting peace to come to quote-unquote security, then investors, Stefan and the rest of them coming in, pouring in the dollars. No, it needs to be a deeply community-driven process of deliberation about choices, about lifestyle, about cultural technology. And that's why I say this peace-building matrix, this peace-building frame is really the only frame we have to bring together development, security, and respect for people. And the movement that they have at the regional level, Kenyan Turkana moving to South Sudan and vice versa, is also reflected at the global level, right? So the same pressures are in the Sahel, and there's a whole culture for you to be a heroic young man, or a woman who has real ambitions for herself. Well, you trek the desert, and you go over the Mediterranean, and you go into Europe. And that's not going to stop ever until people feel that they have real options. And at the core of that option is how energy is used to make people's lives better. Of course, it must be said, and it needs to always be said by African diplomats, and we don't say this enough, I don't think we should be in the business of stopping Africans from going where they want to go. If the energy and opportunities are in Europe, by all means, have at it. But we need to, the reason we try and engage on that is because it's such an inhumanly difficult and cruel process to migrate. So we want that to reduce. We want them to have more options at home. But if they don't have options, they will move. And I'll say with a light touch, I don't know if any of you recall this amazing video from Paris, where this young man, I think from Mali or Senegal, climbed a building to save a baby. You remember that? Yeah. You know, when I saw that, I was so filled with admiration for him. And then I wondered, European migration policy, do you really think you can stop this person who can scale buildings to save babies? This person is unstoppable. It's much better you invest in them so that courage and sense of integrity can find root and opportunity in Senegal or Mali.
So Martin, I know we only ask hard questions behind closed doors. But anyway, you're among friends here. I mean, this whole story of Kenya going to Haiti, I mean, what are you doing there? What made you think that it's Kenya that's going to go and subdue gangs, get them to settle down? Why you? Why Kenya?
Well, this is an excellent question, and it's a question that I look forward all the time to answering because it does seem mystifying. when we were in the Security Council, you make all these choices. So you go in and you think you have it all planned out. Then you encounter the reality, or your plans usually fall apart, but you pretend they don't fall apart, and you keep going. And those of you who are students here, if I may just say, strategy is great, but adjusting to failed strategy is what gets you success. So we didn't fail, but what we did was we went to the council and encountered different files, and we had to make choices about how to prioritize them. And we thought that Haiti and Colombia were two that needed our special attention. One, because we're Africans, and Africans have decided in the African Union that the African diaspora, wherever it may be, is our sixth region, and that we need to embrace people of African descent who may have left Africa generations ago through no desire of their own, of those of their ancestors. So we started to ask difficult questions to the Security Council about the status of Afro-Colombians when it came to the Colombia peace process, which is a great, admirable peace process, a truly admirable, inspired peace process. But we said, look, what about the Afro-Colombians? There's an ethnic chapter in the peace agreement. Is it being implemented? If indeed peace is about inclusion, then if Afro-Colombians are excluded, are you really sure your peace is secure? And then now with Haiti, when we got in the council, the reaction to Haiti was roll the eyes, it's too bad, there's nothing that can be done, Haiti is on its own. And this for us seemed deeply unfair and unjust because so many of the problems Haiti is suffering are not generated within Haiti. They are the result of years of a certain kind of treatment by powerful states and powerful Haitians. And so we started making a lot more noise about Haiti. And I personally I read The Black Jacobin, C.L.R. James' great book when I was in college, and it changed my life in understanding how the global system works. And I've always thought that Haiti is a perfect country to look at if you want to know how the global system works. Look at Haiti and then look at the United States. Great prosperity and opportunity and great suffering on this side. So we were very active on that file, led a lot of initiatives on that file. And when the Secretary General asked, made a public appeal for what he called a strike force, because the gangs were not controllable by the Haitian National Police, and there was no way to transition a political process that would lead to a credible election. There's no single elected official in Haiti today. We put up our hand and said we would be willing to be part of the strike force. We had no idea at the time that we wanted to lead it. Then there was just silence for a whole year. There was nothing being done. No one was saying anything about it. So we had been having conversations with the United States, and the United States was of the opinion that they had seen and participated in many different kind of peacekeeping or interventions in Haiti that had not succeeded. So there was a need for a different way. And we mentioned to them, well, Africans know a lot about fragile states. There are a lot of professors here who know a lot about fragile states, but there are a lot of Africans here who've come from fragile states, who know it in a different way. So we put up our hand to provoke movement, and we succeeded because when we said we are ready to lead, suddenly it became part of the conversation. It led to this resolution in the council, which we wanted. But what are we trying to do? Kenya wants to be part of a multinational support mission. It's not a mission that's going to be configured like other UN peacekeeping missions. It's specifically to support the Haitian National Police. It's not a force that will sit outside and do its own thing. It will work hand in glove with the Haitian National Police, which is why it's a relatively small force. Secondly, what Kenya does not have solutions for Haiti. But we know that if the security in the South does not get to a basic minimum level, it's going to be impossible to have a political process. And what political process do we believe is needed? It's not for us to dictate, but we believe that there has to be an inclusive transition that brings in the different political actors in Haiti and for all of them together to march towards an election. Elections are divisive. It's very difficult to be in a deeply divided, almost collapsed state and then have elections day two. So you have to have a transition, but that transition cannot be dominated by one person or two people. It has to be inclusive of Haitian society, Haitian political aspirations. And then we also need to have the UN country team and others working on to help stand up the criminal justice system, help with livelihood efforts. And here, since we're in the energy room, we know that Haiti is, much of Haiti is in environmental distress. So part of the peace building and the economic recovery of Haiti must have the energy and environmental protection and recovery at its core. Yeah, a group of policemen and women are not going to get all that done. And that's why Kenya's mission is one part of what must be a multifaceted mission. How will this be coordinated? That's where we're pushing. We need more countries, more institutions to stand up and be part of that. Haitians in Haiti appear to be hopeful about the mission. But I have to be honest, the Haitian civil society is very skeptical because they have a lot of trust. They have low trust because of the way Haiti has been treated. But I want to say to any Haitian who's here, or in fact, any Haitian civil society, there are some who demonstrate outside my mission every Friday, that Kenya is going to Haiti with the best of intentions as part of a multinational security force. And we don't think we have the solution, but we want to be part of a solution. For us, it's to work with the Haitian police.
Thank you so much, Martin. Vivek is giving me the evil eye, so it's time to stop. I'm sure we could have had a lot more discussion on this and the geopolitics of energy. So once again, Martin, thank you very much.
I'll come to you and encourage your opportunity lab. Please come to the UN. We talk a lot there. That's what we do. But so much of shaping the world's mind is done there as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew and Ambassador Kimani, for shedding light on that very important topic. I request everyone to remain in your seats as we close. And as Jason pointed out earlier in the day, the Energy Opportunity Lab was announced around this time last year at COP27 with generous support from Bedari Collective. And it's my pleasure to invite Matthew Harris, the founder of Bedari Collective and the founding partner of Global Infrastructure Partners, to deliver the closing remarks.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I hope it's been a productive day, and thank you all for coming out to support what's happening at the EOL, the Energy Opportunity Lab. I was kind of reflecting on what originally inspired Jason and I to think about this, and I think we had a lunch. Was it before COVID or during COVID? It might have been during COVID in 2020 or something. And I was remarking at how critical energy access was in the context of everything that's going on in the world, both as it relates to energy access itself, but also its juxtaposition vis-a-vis the energy transition, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I said, we should really have some sort of program that addresses these issues inside of CGEP. And I think it was born in that conversation, and here it is today, manifested in all of you spending such a meaningful amount of your own time to debate the issues and talk about it. And I'm sure it will be one of many conversations and many convenings over many, many years, because this topic generally is not getting any easier. So thank you all. Energy access is its own issue. But is there something like 675 million people in the world that don't have access to energy today? I think it's probably been well discussed today how essential energy is to human thriving, along with healthcare and education. Those are the three that I think about. I know I take them for granted. Those are things I've always had access to in my life. And it's hard to imagine what my life would be like if I didn't have access to some or all of those. So in addition to the 675 million people that have no access, there's countless more that have very limited access, that can probably only drive a cell phone or mobile device, but far from the types of things that I take for granted in my life. I think there were statistics that I was reading yesterday, flying back from San Francisco. 16 out of 20 of the countries on the planet that have the most limited access to energy exist in the global south. 30% of Americans give up basic necessities in order to pay their energy bill. And the investment we need to rectify these imbalances, 2 or 3x, probably more than what we're investing today. And then I think about, I don't know if you all, saw this article earlier this week about this Chinese mission to Mars, and how they used an AI-generated robot to extract oxygen from the ice that exists on Mars, with the theory being that if you can replicate that at scale, you can create oxygen that can be used to inhabit the planet. And I'm thinking to myself, how on earth can we accomplish that but not provide electricity to every single human being on the planet? So we should not in any way compromise. Energy access should be available to everyone. And I think that's one of the great, focal points of what this EOL can and should do. But it's not as simple as that. We're in the midst of a process of decarbonizing the global economy, this energy transition, which is, by my count, $5 to $10 trillion annually. And it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, what's happening there in terms of electrification and completely redoing the global economy using electrification, green energy, decarbonizing fundamental industries like cement, petrochemicals, steel. That's an amazing opportunity for energy access, right? Because we have to redo the whole system over 50 years or whatever it is. So let's make sure we design into this energy transition the delivery of cheap, clean energy to people that don't have it today. You either don't have it at all or don't have enough of it to use what modern society and life can provide to somebody. So that's all great, and we've got things from EV vehicles and charging. We've got distributed energy, which is a huge opportunity for energy access. Those are all fundamental. But at the same time, it's not a straight line, right? Because the amount of infrastructure that's required to decarbonize is in fact massive. And there are debates happening all the time in countries that don't have energy access today that are saying, wait a minute, you're telling me that all of this new clean green energy is something that can be available to me and I can aspire to. It's going to cost a lot of money. Where's the money going to come from? And at the same time, there are fossil fuel alternatives that, do exist for many of these communities, for many of these countries. And I'm not advocating in any way fossil fuels over clean energy. That's not my point. My point is that debate and that balance and that dialogue has to be part of what this convening is doing. The fundamental reason why I thought of Jason and this team around this issue is because it's not a simple issue. And I found no place on the planet that has the ability to handle the kind of dialogues that are involved in the complexity, not just of energy access, but in a world where we're completely redoing the whole energy access distribution system. And so by definition, there are going to be gaps that emerge. There are going to be countries that are being told, it's happening today, no, you have to wait until green, clean energy is available. And that may be the right answer. But if you think about somebody who's a subsistence farmer, or what the difference that access to energy could make in their life, and should it be allowed using natural gas? These are, again, I'm not advocating what's right or what's wrong, but that's the debate that this group is capable of having. And there really is no place that I've found that has the chemistry and the resources and the thought process to deliver it. So as you all engage in this effort in whatever way you choose to do, I urge you to be bold, to think big. There's no such thing as making a mistake. I think it was Oprah Winfrey who once said, if you think about making a mistake, it's not a mistake. It's just the universe pushing you in a different direction, telling you to go a different way or to try to find another way to do it. So think big, think bold, come up with ideas that are radical, that haven't ever been thought of before. And let's engage in this process together as we try to think about how to provide access to every single human being on this planet. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt, for your remarks and for your leadership in setting up this initiative. So we have now come to the end of the first Energy Opportunity Forum. We thank each and every one of you for joining us today, and we look forward to engaging with you at other platforms in the future. A big thanks to the team behind these efforts. Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.